Gentlemen, if everyone can take their seats, we can begin. We are, I think, about 10 minutes behind schedule. Ambassador Verma, it's such a pleasure to have you here again with us. Warm welcome to you, my friend Ashley, Greg, Claudio from Gilead Sciences, who've actually made this whole thing possible for us. We are so glad to be doing this event and entering into a debate on some of these most critical areas which impact healthcare, not just in India, but across the world. So here we are debating. We began yesterday evening with a very warm and very successful welcome address by the Honorable Minister, MOS for Finance, Mr. Jayant Sinha, who kicked off the deliberations we are going to have today. And as was expressed yesterday night, the purpose of this gathering is not just about deepening the Indo-US partnership, but trying in many ways to attempt to stretch its horizons, stretch the frontiers of this relationship, expand it into the actual strategic commercial domain which our Prime Minister and the President of the United States spoke about and launched when they had met. In a way, the timing of this forum could not be better. Tomorrow, 4th of December, is marked as Yellow Ribbon Day, and that is the day that seeks to raise awareness about hepatitis C, one of the most debilitating diseases, and perhaps in a country like India, there are more people infected today by Hep C than there are by HIV. And yet awareness, if you compare awareness levels of the two diseases, Hep C does not gather that much, does not garner that much public attention and focus. And I've had, in my own experience, I've seen patients who may have had the symptoms for a very long time, 6 months, 1 year. The symptoms are there, but the diagnosis took so long just because of simple matters of access to relevant diagnostic tools. But once diagnosed, the solutions are simple, the solutions are available. So that is the truth about so many of the kinds of diseases which we are battling today in this world. So this partnership which we are talking about today is a collaboration, I would say, between the India and the US, not just as natural allies. It is representative of the congruence of beliefs, of deep-rooted core beliefs between our two nations. And it is a partnership which has had its successes at various levels, both at the bilateral and at the multilateral levels at various times. But more importantly, what we need to try to do is, bring our two societies together. And when we talk of societies, we're talking of the entire framework. We're talking of government-to-government collaborations, business-to-business collaboration, people-to-people collaborations, which are really the strength of this partnership. Bringing the two societies together in addressing these complex issues, which are societal issues, and ultimately taking care of our shared responsibilities towards the people of our nations and the people of the world. So the next natural evolution of this newly cemented strategic commercial dialogue is in a way to address pressing challenges like healthcare, which affect not just us, but also afflict the entire world, where we have 2 billion people without primary access to basic healthcare. Now, healthcare is an area which has actually remained at the center, at the forefront of technology innovation, of technology development, technology innovation across the world. But innovation is not just limited to path-breaking medical research in new drugs, in new pharmaceuticals. When we're talking about innovation, it is, a whole process which becomes an essential driver in incorporating technologies, incorporating learnings, incorporating experiences, in changing processes, delivery systems, ways of diagnostics across the entire health value chain. So this is the kind of collaborative partnership which we are talking about, and which I think is key to us realizing our global commitments, which move us to the SDGs. And more we realize that as we persist in our efforts to eliminate diseases and illnesses, we need the expertise, we need the skills, we need the knowledge, the experience, the practical solutions, the technology, and all the myriad tools that have been developed across the world to bring them together. And we have now more than over a century of research in medical sciences. The bigger questions today are actually no longer about the availability of skills, the knowledge, the tools. They are more about access to them, creating systems which improve access, which make healthcare affordable, which make healthcare reachable. So how to ensure that citizens of the world can enjoy easy quality healthcare that is both preventive and palliative, by easing access to quality diagnostics, medication, and care. In the course of the day, we'll have the chance to today listen to many experts, academics, policymakers, from all walks of life, who will discuss the potential that exists in taking this partnership forward, and to discuss various ways in which we can expand the government-to-government, business-to-business, and people-to-people collaborative opportunities that are lying there ahead of us in the sector. Because we believe that this Indo-US partnership can be instrumental in helping the world realize all the ambitious goals and targets which have been outlined in the health goals of the SDG. It is extremely important, and we need to confront and address issues when we're talking of India-US partnership. Not shy away, but confront the issues which deal with technology transfer, with IPR, and there are many contentious issues. What are the applicable solutions? The barriers to indigenization, the barriers to Make in India, they all need to be put on the table and discussed. In the course of the day, you will hear from our distinguished speakers, such as Excellency Ambassador Verma, who's here, Dr. Tellis on the partnership itself, as well as other experts on issues affecting India and the world in the field of global healthcare. And I hope at the end of these deliberations, which will continue till about lunch, each of us is able to leave this room with a far more optimistic perspective, a far better roadmap, which will enable us to move along and quicken this partnership into this vital domain. So with this, what I'm going to do is invite Dr. Tellis right here to conduct the proceedings, and request Ambassador Verma to join him here to carry you through the rest of the morning. Thank you so much. Thanks.
I have the honor to introduce and welcome today Ambassador Richard Verma, the US Ambassador to India. In truth, he requires no introduction. But it gives me great personal pleasure to do so anyway, if nothing else, as a tribute to the remarkable work he has done here in India since his arrival. Rich is the exemplar of the success of the United States as a great and fertile melting pot, drawing someone with roots in India to excel in the United States and then go back to represent his country in the land of his ancestors. That excellence, in Rich's case, has been personified by a long and distinguished career in public service. Rich served in the military with the US Air Force as a judge advocate, then on Capitol Hill with Jack Murtha, but more importantly as the National Security Advisor to the then Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid. and thereafter in the executive branch as the Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs under Secretary Clinton when she was Secretary of State in President Obama's first term. In India, we all know how well he managed with great success President Obama's second visit to New Delhi, the first appearance by a US president as a guest for India's Republic Day. And following that, the first ever strategic and commercial dialogue between our two nations. These were undoubtedly remarkable successes. But let me let you in on a secret. If Washington today still manages, amidst all the competing crises in the world, in Southeast Asia, Europe, and the greater Middle East, if Washington still manages to keep India front and center as the prize to be secured for the success of larger American strategy in Asia, it is owed in great measure to what Ambassador Richard Verma and his staff do here at the embassy in New Delhi. This, to my mind, is the true measure of his enduring success. And I want to wish him all the best for the remainder of his tenure, that this becomes truly something that we leave behind as a legacy for the next administration to come. So without further ado, let me yield the podium and invite Ambassador Verma to offer his reflections on the progress we have made in deepening the bilateral relationship and on the enormous breadth of the engagement that has come to characterize US-India ties today, a diversity and a breadth that was impossible to imagine when this relationship began to be transformed some 2 decades ago. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ambassador Richard Verma.
Nice introduction. Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you. Let me thank my friends at ORF and the other friends in the room from Washington who are here. As I joke with my friends from ORF, this is my bi-weekly event with you, as I've come to see you very often, and I'm happy to do and come out to your events because you produce such great scholarship that we all rely on, and Ashley is as well. You were very kind to talk about me, but there are several of your publications that I keep printed out on my desk that I refer to regularly, that I have put in speeches, whether it's your publication called Making Waves or the one on the kind of strategic importance of the economic relationship with India. We read them closely and we wait for your next publication. So hopefully that's coming out soon. We also, think about how much time and effort and kind of work has gone into this relationship, and Ashley and Bob Blackwell and so many others have spent a lot of time and effort on this relationship over the years. So thanks for the service that you did here in New Delhi as well. I do want to just pause for a moment and express our sympathies to all those people impacted by the floods in Chennai, which have been very devastating. And we're watching that situation closely. And we also express our sympathies to the victims of a shooting in California that occurred today as well. And we're watching that very closely as well. Let me just spend a few minutes talking to you, and then I look forward to sitting down with you, Ashley. But clearly, the U.S.-India relationship has been on a solid and I would say decidedly upward trajectory. No question about it, our two heads of state like each other and get along with each other. But as the president has said many times, it's only natural that we're friends because our countries share so many common values together. We are multicultural societies that cherish similar traditions of tolerance, participatory governance, and rules-based international systems. And we're uniquely capable of advancing of an inclusive and consultative approach to the global challenges of this century. And from Ashley to Senator McCain to other kind of bipartisan reflection now, I think it is a commonly held view in Washington and New Delhi that it's the US and India coming together that can really do a lot to uphold the rules-based order of the post-World War II era. And that's the trajectory that we're on. And President Obama has said that our relationship is one that could define the 21st century. And I think Prime Minister Modi may have said it best when he noted that the true value of the US-India relationship is not what we do for each other, but really it's the impact on global peace and prosperity that we have for the world. And I've even started talking about this partnership as an alliance for global prosperity, an alliance for global prosperity. Now that, imagine those words. We've come a long way to be able to utter phrases like that. And I feel like we all also have a responsibility to deliver on that potential. And so I appreciate all of you coming together today in that spirit. Now, I think it's a fair question for all of you to ask. How are we doing when you measure the progress that you say that we've made? What is the evidence? And I think some of you may know some of these statistics already, but this past summer, on the anniversary of the Civil Nuclear Agreement that Ashley was a big part of, we did a little exercise where we measured the progress in key categories, and we looked at the data. We didn't just listen to each other say how good things were. We actually looked at the numbers. And I'll just maybe give you a few numbers. You know, in 2005, our two-way trade number was about $35 billion. Last year, that number exceeded $105 billion, so the two-way trade numbers were tripled. In 2005, just on the number of students studying in India, in the United States, we had 30,000 Indian students in the United States. Last year, we had the highest ever, 130,000. 2005, we had 400,000 Indian visitors to the United States. Last year, we had the highest ever, 1.2 million. In 2005, there were 50 Indian companies in the United States. Now there are over 200 employing hundreds of thousands. In 2005, there were 200 companies, 200 US companies in India. Now there are over 500 employing several million people. In defense, in 2005, we had $0 in defense sales, zero. We are now into the well over $10 billion, and even more significantly, we're now talking about building and producing defense items together. So you don't have to take my word for it. Even in the categories that are, some would say, controversial, agricultural trade, we were at $1.5 billion in 2005, and we're now approaching $7 billion in agricultural trade. So, you know, the trajectory, we may have had ups and downs over the course of, let's say, 10 years, but the trajectory has been quite positive and quite certain. Now, could we do more? We could do more. And let's look at this year, and maybe from the visit of the president in January, maybe give you some sense of what we've been working on. On the strategic side, we have deepened our military-to-military relationships. We now train together in increasingly complex air, naval, army, and special forces exercise. Just in the last 3 months, we've done the Malabar exercise with the Japanese Navy. We've done the Yuda Army exercise. We have done a special forces exercise with the Ministry of Home Affairs for the first time ever. We will do the red flag exercise, which is now confirmed in the spring of next year in Alaska. And if you think about what these exercises are, they are not simply paper or PowerPoint presentations to each other's militaries. These are our best fighters, men and women, coming together to talk about how we would respond to humanitarian crises, but also how we would employ force if necessary. and how we might do so in contested theaters of operation. And that is a big difference. That is now discussions of interoperability and jointness that we've not had before. So these exercises are becoming increasingly important. Next week, Defense Minister Parakar will be the first Indian defense minister to visit a major U.S. combatant command when he visits our Pacific Command headquarters in Hawaii. Also, this fall, I mentioned we're now doing not only military sales, but we're doing production and development right here in India. And I was pleased to see Boeing sign a $3 billion agreement to produce Apache and Chinook helicopters for the Indian Air Force, and much of the componentry will be made right here in India. Now on the trade and investment front, we have been taking on the ease of doing business factors that sometimes can deter U.S. companies and investors, such as tax and legal certainty and easing regulatory burdens. And I think we are making progress in that regard. And it's not just U.S. companies that are voicing those concerns, it's also Indian companies who are coming together and voicing similar concerns. But we've also had progress, as I've said, as reflected in the fact that we held our first ever strategic and commercial dialogue in September with Secretaries Kerry and Pritzker meeting with their counterparts. We followed up in November with our trade policy forum, with the U.S. trade representative met with his counterpart to discuss in detail our trade relationship, with the goal of continuing to break down trade barriers and laying the foundation for reaching our target of $500 billion in two-way trade. And I really believe that we can get there. Another major accomplishment I want to highlight, which just occurred this week, is the recent $2.6 billion agreement with GE to produce next-generation locomotives for India's vast railway system. And again, they will be making and assembling much of the product right here in India. Now, some of you may be aware that this week in Paris, the President and Prime Minister reaffirmed the new, deeper partnership India and the United States established during their meeting in January. And President Obama recognized that the Paris Climate Agreement must protect the ability of countries like India to promote socioeconomic development. At the same time, the agreement should reflect serious and ambitious action by all countries to curb their carbon pollution in order to achieve the sustainable growth we seek. While these goals are challenging, they are not irreconcilable. And that is why our teams are working hard to meet them. And I am proud of the leadership role that the United States and India are both taking. On November 30th, the United States and India joined forces with 18 other governments and key stakeholders like Bill Gates, Ratan Tata, Mukesh Ambani, the University of California, to launch Mission Innovation and the Breakthrough Energy Coalition. The combined efforts of government, industry, and academia and non-governmental organizations are aiming to reinvigorate and accelerate global clean energy innovation in order to make new technologies widely available and readily affordable. India's leadership in mission innovation is strongly supported by its efforts in launching the International Solar Alliance. Now, this compact between 121 countries will drive down the cost of development, deployment, and maintenance of solar energy around the world by promoting investment, skilling people, and facilitating the transfer of knowledge. This is the type of bold leadership on the international stage that will help humanity get increasingly reliable and cleaner types of energy. And it will help those at the bottom of the economic pyramid most. Beyond the strategic, the economic, and the environmental areas, there are so many other areas we continue to push our cooperation to new heights, from global health security to agriculture, deep sea and deep space exploration, cybersecurity, and education. We are expanding our work together, and we will continue to do so in the months and years ahead. So as I approach this now first anniversary as my arrival as ambassador, I continue to remain very optimistic about the positive path we are on and the results we will continue to achieve for both of our countries. I'm also clear-eyed about the obstacles we confront together. India has to grapple with several significant development challenges, including some 300 million people with no access to electricity. Air pollution impacts the health of too many. Massive urbanization and migration from villages to cities continues at a rapid pace, and an estimated 1 million young people are entering the job market each month. Certainly, these are real challenges for India that occur on a scale that most countries in the world, quite frankly, would find difficult to grasp. But in my view, in that scale and in those numbers are also tremendous opportunities and reason for great hope. I'm speaking of India's human capital, its people, who will become in the years ahead the world's largest population, with the largest middle class, with the most college graduates, with the largest youth population, the most patent holders, the most IT professionals. I could go on and on. The dynamism and energy that exists in India today is unrivaled almost anywhere else in the world. And its democratic traditions, commitment to the rule of law, innovation, culture, and value of education are all powerful assets that will be key to its continued competitiveness and global leadership in the years to come. I am immensely proud of the progress we've made together in recent years, and my team and I at the mission are all honored to be here at really what is a consequential moment in our relationship, and working with all of you to realize the tremendous potential of our relationship, not only for our own citizens, but for the world as well. So we appreciate what you're doing here today. We look forward to continuing to working with all of you. Appreciate the invitation to be with you, and I look forward to sitting down with Ashley. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Do I need this? Can you hear me? All right. Pastor, thank you. That was
Thank
sweet.
you.
That was sweet music to my ears.
Okay.
Last night we had Jansen deliver the keynote address at the dinner, and the point that he made actually started out with was that it is impossible today to separate India and the United States, and he used himself as an example. That in the people that we have, who traverse across borders, who work across societies, he said it's hard to tell, where America ends and where India begins. And in some sense, that's the realization, I think, of the dream going back to the beginning. And you today talked about an alliance, words that people would be most, shocked by in a different generation, right? As you look to the future, what do you see as the 2 or 3 key drivers that take the relationship to where we want it to go?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Can you guys hear me okay? So, look, I think first, the people will continue to drive our relationship forward. I don't think it's just a coincidence that there's 3 million Indians in the United States, right? As I said, we have this set of values that draw our 2 countries together. I was reminded when India recognized its Constitution Day, I think first Constitution Day last week, and many people were looking at the similarities between our founding documents. Both of our constitutions start with the words, "We the people." And when India was deciding what type of government to choose, it did not have to choose, first of all, democracy, a federal system, a bicameral system, a pluralistic system, a system that protects minority rights, that respects the rule of law, that resolves disputes peacefully with a military overseen by civilians. I mean, I could go on and on through the governmental and legal structures. And then there are the human values that connect us, the commitment to innovation and to science and to exploration and learning, and all of these values that draw our countries together. Almost regardless of what party or what president or what prime minister is in power. And that force, that's unstoppable, right? So we will continue to see our two countries drawn to each other. Now, the question for those of us who serve in government is, what can we do to build upon that, to propel that, and actually make the world safer, more prosperous, more free and open, and actually protects those values in places where those values, frankly, are sometimes at risk, as we see as you open up the paper on any given day. And that's where I think our leaders have now come towards each other and said, look, as we look around the world, we may have had our ups and downs in the relationship. You know, we may have been on a roller coaster over, let's say, 50 or 60 years. But I don't think there's any question now. We have reached a point where the strategic and economic and human importance of this relationship is a bit unstoppable. And part of our goal as we look to the future is to make sure that we make it durable, that when there are conflicts or tensions in the relationship, and there will be, and there are, because we are not the same countries, we don't aspire to be, but that we solve those disputes, but that we continue to see the big picture. So that's a lot of macro stuff, but what does that mean in specifics? That means continuing to make sure that we stand up not only in South Asia, but across the Asia Pacific for things that matter to us. Open sea lanes, resolving disputes peacefully, upholding the rule of law, standing up for individual rights and freedom. That means when the Prime Minister was in Silicon Valley using science and innovation to actually tackle some of the world's biggest societal problems. This idea that 1 + 1 does not equal 2. In other words, when our best and brightest come together, we just unleash incredible potential. That's what we're working on. And we do that through all of these different initiatives, the 80 initiatives, the 30 working groups from a government perspective, as I said, and our goal is not to restrain the people that have done so much. That's why I'm optimistic, but we've got to keep working at it. And just not assume that we're going to continue to be on this trajectory that we have been. But that's what we're committed to do.
Thank you. It strikes me as I was listening to you speak that while there are enormous convergences in the relationship for all the reasons you laid out, the relationship is also unnatural in a different sense, which is never before have two large societies with quite different histories, and at radically different stages of economic development, which is what often accounts, as you pointed out, for some of the difficulties that we have, for example, in trade and climate, attempted to build a strategic partnership of this consequence. How do we sensitize our leaderships in Delhi and in Washington about the fact that the challenges really come from these structural factors, the differences in development levels, and are not always linked to the politics of personalities or things like that? What is the work that we have to do, in a sense, at home in both countries?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and maybe the area where we need to spend the most time. But I will tell you, given the amount of time that the president has spent on the relationship, the fact that he's been here twice, the 6 visits with the Prime Minister just in the last 15 months or so, I think that's, when I hear the president speak, it is very much in a spirit of partnership. It is in a spirit of, he's very empathetic, I think, understanding of India's development needs. He said it, I think, repeatedly in Paris the other day. In fact, I think one of the things he said first when he was launching Mission Innovation is that, it's important that any agreement we construct here in Paris respect the right of those 300 million people to have affordable electricity. So I think he understands that. Sometimes both of our bureaucracies need to perhaps have that same understanding, but that's natural. We all protect our sets of interests. But I think we are now coming closer to seeing the world through the lens of each other. Having said all that, the world is also changing rapidly, and we now see India, as the Foreign Secretary said, not as a balancing power or as a kind of non-aligned power, but as a global power and as a leading power, and we support that rise very much. And so that then involves a whole different set of engagements and conversations as well. So that's very, frankly, exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's actually fascinating that the US, has, where India is concerned, has come out time and again so clearly emphasizing its commitment to aiding India realize its potential as a global power.
Right.
In fact, I can't imagine in our history when we've ever done that in so consistent a fashion.
Right.
What's behind it? Because sometimes Indians, friends of mine, are sort of perplexed at the enthusiasm that the US has for India, which is sort of hard to explain by the canons of conventional realist politics.
Yeah.
And people sometimes wonder whether there is a hidden agenda. And so when you think about this, when you have to explain to your counterparts that the US is serious when it talks about supporting India in a leading role as opposed to a balancing role, how do you explain that?
I think it probably starts with going back to that value set. That's frankly not a commitment we make to every country in the world, right?
Yes.
It's a very, as you described it, a very unique kind of partnership we have. As the president said, we want to be India's best partner. Not just a partner, not a natural partner, not a strategic partner. We want to be India's best partner. So, look, I see it as I go around to these different military exercises, and I see the way that our naval officers or Air Force officers or Army officers come together so naturally, the professional militaries that we have. I see it in our science collaboration and the way that we can kind of naturally and seamlessly flow between company and project and idea to idea. And what I think we need to do is make sure that our structures, our governmental systems, our legal systems are parallel as well. But no, the commitment is real. It is serious. It's in our collective national interests. I believe that is the determination and judgment that both of our leaderships have made.
Let me push you on that question with respect to defense.
Yeah.
India is now at a stage where it has to modernize very substantial portions of its defense capabilities because it lives in an environment that is not always the most salutary for India's interests. How far can we go with India in the area of defense cooperation, given that India still will continue to pursue a largely independent foreign policy? As far as the US is concerned, we've traditionally dealt with our allies in the most generous fashion. And we've begun to deal with India in ways that almost resemble the way we deal with allies. Are there natural limits to what we can do with India because it is not a formal ally? Or is the future, in a sense, of this question unwritten? How do you see the long-term aspirations for defense cooperation?
Well, I think, again, given you some of those 10-year numbers and how far we've come in 10 years, again, you were here 10 years ago, I think it would be hard to imagine where we are today if you were to think 10 years ago, would we be able to be doing all these things in 2015? So I actually think that trajectory will continue. Are there limits? Of course. Obviously, India will have to decide for itself ultimately on some of these questions. But again, when you look at defense cooperation is about supporting policies and principles ultimately, right? Defense is a tool
Sure.
to protect and defend values and interests in people. And so if we are aligned on the priorities globally and regionally, then I think the tools that we use, whether they are in the intelligence arena, homeland security cooperation, counterterrorism cooperation, Coast Guard cooperation, amphibious brigades, I mean, I could go through the list. The tools then follow somewhat naturally. So we need to make sure from a foreign policy perspective, from an economic policy perspective, from a global trading perspective, that we continue to stay aligned. To the extent we have disagreements, we try to resolve them. And then the tools that we need to protect and enhance those values will actually, I think, come very naturally as they have, if that makes sense.
No, that makes complete sense. Let
Yeah.
me.
So in other words, I wouldn't try to put the things ahead of
the achievements.
Exactly.
But my own sense is that the future is really open, because to the degree that India is looking to the United States in ways that it never did before.
Yeah,
for
as you
building-
know, we are
Yeah.
now talking about carrier cooperation,
Yeah.
jet engine,
Yes.
fighter cooperation. I mean, areas of cooperation
Yes.
that we've not explored before.
Right. And these are things that are symbolically important, because I think it goes to answering that uncertainty that people have sometimes in India as to how far will the US go. And if we end up being able to demonstrate tangible progress in things like the carrier program or the jet engine program,
Yeah.
and in the other things we are doing broadly in the mill-to-mill area, that changes the question. Let me come back to a different dimension. I think we have the issue of values, in a sense, pretty much covered, because there's no fundamental disagreement about the kind of world order we want. We have made dramatic progress, as you point out, in defense. But it always strikes me that our deepest relationships have a very strong economic underpinning. That no matter how much we are committed at the ideational level, or even at the strategic level, if our material interests, in a sense, don't reinforce that, that becomes hard to do. And I'm often struck by the disjuncture in our relationship, our economic relationship with a country like China, with whom we don't share values, with whom we are often at odds with on many military issues, but yet have a very robust economic relationship. How do we square the circle with India? How do we get to the point where we can continue building stronger and stronger foundations on the economic side?
Yeah, on the economic side, again, the data would suggest we've come a long way, but we can go a lot further. Really, it's still a very small percentage of our economy, and India's economy that's actually trading with each other.
Yes.
Even though we've crossed the $105 billion threshold, it's still pockets of our countries, given the size of our economies and the number of people that both of our countries have. So we can do a lot more. We actually are doing a lot more. And when I travel around the country now, and I've taken some 36 trips around the country, I'm starting to get tired of the seat 1A in my domestic travel, but it's been really fascinating to see the number, this kind of competitive federalism that's out there, and the number of states that are moving quickly to do and attract investment into their states. Could we do more, working with the central government on reforms? We could, and we are, and we will continue to do so. But at the same time, I also think we have to do a better job, not only in the United States, but Western countries more broadly, to make the argument that pro-business, pro-growth, pro-kind of connection to the international trading system is good for people across the economic pyramid, not just for those at the top of the economic pyramid. So if you think about the challenges that both the United States and India have shared, economic inequality, job creation, powering our making sure our economy stayed powered to a sufficient level. Fact is, we need each other. We need each other in this global economy. And we have to create opportunities for our people in this new century that is more digital, that is more complex, that requires different skills than maybe what people had even 10 or 15 years ago. And so we have to make the argument that as opening, connecting to the international trading system, tearing down some of the barriers that still exist, are good not just for people in the city, but good for people in the rural areas, not good just for the elites, but also good for all those people who would like to climb up into the middle and upper class, as is the dream in the United States as well. And we have to make that same case in the United States too, that this trading relationship with India benefits both of our countries. And that, I think, we will have to continue to work on. And hopefully continue to bring down the barriers that exist, ultimately, so we can give people a better way of life. That's what this is about.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank
You have
you.
been most kind to spend so much time with us, but I'm not going to let you go before I ask you one last question.
An easy one.
An easy one.
Okay.
Has to do with the point you made in your formal remarks, which is that the ultimate test of the United States and India, in an exemplary sense, will be not what we do for each other alone, but what we do for the world.
Yeah.
This conference is focusing on healthcare today.
Yeah.
When you think out 10 years, what do you imagine the United States and India could do together for others?
Oh, I can go through a long list because we're already doing some of it. So our healthcare professionals are already working in 9 African countries on maternal and child health. Our space professionals are doing not only deep space exploration together, we shared telemetry data and on the Mars mission, but we do low Earth orbit activity together on weather forecasting and monsoon forecasting and satellite imaging that can help people in all parts of the world. As I said, we now have a joint strategic vision that talks about maritime security, combating piracy, combating nonproliferation, not just in South Asia, but across the Asia Pacific. I could go on and on through the list. This notion of using science and innovation to help people develop, kind of leapfrog over traditional kind of longer periods of development, I think has real impact. When I listened to what the Prime Minister was saying in Silicon Valley, that was my takeaway. That was, how do we use science and innovation to basically help people improve their daily lives and solve big health, economic, societal, safety, infrastructure challenges. So we have, I just think we could go through the list, but it's really unlimited. If we were to come together, what we could do for ordinary people around the world is really significant.
Well, thank you so very much. I want to wish you and your staff at the embassy all the best.
We have a great staff at the embassy. We're very, very fortunate.
It is wonderful. It is wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming here this morning.
Thank you.
To
It's always great
get
to
this
see you.
get this conversation
Yeah.
started.
Thank you.
Thanks. Ray.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Ron is already here. Can I request you all to join us, please? And before I hand over to Dr. Rajiv Kumar to chair this particular panel discussion, I will quickly introduce him and then let him run the panel here onwards. Dr. Rajiv Kumar is certainly one of Delhi's and India's finest thinkers on economic policy, author of a number of publications, head of one of the major think tanks, ICRAER, and currently a senior fellow at the Center for Policy Research. He also runs his own organization that works on contemporary issues and is commonly read in the most popular Indian newspapers. Dr. Rajiv Kumar has been following this sector, and we are delighted that he has agreed to chair this particular session. And Dr. Kumar, can I hand it over to you now to take it forward? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samir, and good morning to everybody here. And thanks to Gilead and to RF to give me this honor to chair this session. This is the important panel. And I think in some sense the meat of what we are discussing today. And following from the excellent remarks, the very optimistic remarks made by Ambassador Verma, I have to say that this is in some sense the high point from what I've seen in the last, ever since I've started watching Indo-US relations, the high point of Indo-US relations. And Prime Minister Modi has actually gone out of his way in some sense, taken risks to develop that relationship. And he has been, of course, responded. He's got the response from President Obama that has resulted in what it has, what we see today. And I think this is, he has given a very special position to the Indo-US relations. But in my mind, always, the relations, between India and the US will take on a different trajectory if we could get the B2B relationships better than what they are, and can get them to, sort of really prosper. And here, I think the model that we are discussing, the Gilead model, and I'm very glad that 4 years ago, when I first met Gilead, and I suggested to them that why is it that the India-US business always tends to get into a zero-sum game. They really, I think, took on that in some sense, and we now see that this is a situation where there's one sector and one model where there's a positive sum game clearly between the Indians and the US corporates. And I think that is the great point about this model, which is that this is a model which is not just good in itself, but this is a model which can be emulated in other sectors in other countries. And I think, and especially if you look at the importance of this model, which is that it's in a sector, the drugs and pharmaceutical sectors, where since the Uruguay round and afterwards, long ago, 2 decades or more, there has been a hugely contested field between the US corporates, the MNCs, and the Indian generic producers. So here we have a US MNC, which is now cooperating, which is now licensing generic producers in India in a manner that it is done, which therefore means that it's benefited the licensor, the licensee, and the patients. So I think this is something that we can actually, as I said, emulate going forward. And I think this is really the key, which is that can we in other sectors make Indo-US relationship a positive sum game, and as the ambassador said, not just for ourselves, but for the world as well. So if you're really going to talk about Indo-US Alliance for Global Prosperity, I think we need to see this, this particular form of relationship expanding in other sectors, and also growing vertically by now what the 11 licensees that we have of Gilead. Hopefully, I'm sure they will, and this is what I'd heard in Jaipur, when I was with them before, that this will prosper into joint research, into joint scientific discoveries, and who knows what the potential is. So I think this is a very good, this is a start which we all of us must look into as deeply as possible, and then try and see how we can take it to the other sectors. With those very few words, it's a great honor and pleasure to invite my first speaker, Mr. Greg Alton, who is now the Executive Vice President in Gilead and really in charge of everything, that's as far as I can see. And as it should be, he's been there for 16 years. And he's responsible, as I said, I don't want to go down to what all he's responsible for, but also to say that he is on the Dean's Advisory Council at Stanford Law School, and he serves on Partners in Health Board of Trustees. And as you would expect, he's got a bachelor's from Berkeley and a postgraduate from Stanford. Mr. Alton.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. First of all, I want to thank the Observer Research Foundation for convening this meeting. I think this is really important to discuss different models of partnership and collaboration between U.S. businesses and Indian businesses. I also want to thank a few other people, Sanjoy and Ashley, and our shepherd through India, Ron Summers, for all the wonderful work that he's been doing with us. And also want to thank Satya, a very good friend, longtime friend of us, that I'll talk about a little bit in my remarks as well. So I want to start by just talking about how Gilead came to develop the partnerships that we have in India, the rationale behind it, and I'll give you some details about how these partnerships work, and then what we're looking forward to into the future. So at Gilead, we're a research-based company. We're based in California, and we've our science side. Rajiv said that I'm in charge of everything. I'm not in charge of our research and development, but our research and development has developed real breakthrough products to treat HIV and to treat viral hepatitis in particular. We have other products as well. In the area of HIV, we've developed very simple, very potent, very tolerable, safe regimens that allow HIV patients to live a long and normal life. In the area of hepatitis B, same thing. A patient with hepatitis B can go on our therapies and live a long and normal life, and the virus will be suppressed, and the liver doesn't proceed to cirrhosis or damage. In the area of hepatitis C, we've had significant breakthroughs recently, and we can now cure hepatitis C, a very large global disease burden that was mentioned earlier. So that's what we're able to do with our science. But what we also want to do is make sure that while we have this great science that has all this potential, all these opportunities, we need to make sure that the patients can have access to that science. Because if they don't have access, it doesn't do what our R&D intends it to do. In our commercial markets, it's fairly straightforward. We have our ability to launch the products, and we have our promotional activities, and we price the product at a level that provides profits to our business and access to patients. So that's a simple business model. When we first launched our first HIV product in 2001, however, the challenge that I was given was, how can we make these products available to the millions of patients who need these products in places like sub-Saharan Africa? Now, last night, we were at a dinner. The Minister of State, and I apologize for not pronouncing this, Jayant Sinha, mentioned business models. And the business model that we use in a country like the United States or in Western Europe simply would not work in a place like sub-Saharan Africa. So in 2001, my boss came to me and said, figure out how we can do this. And so the first thing I did was look for business models. Are there business models making the products available in places like South Africa? And I looked at our competitors, BMS and other companies, and all of us were struggling at the time. We really weren't providing a lot of product into the area. And so we decided that we would need to sort of innovate on our own in terms of our access policies, in terms of how we would provide the products. And I'll fast forward, between 2001 and 2006, we did a number of things. In 2006, we really need to take a look at, are we being successful? And the answer was absolutely not. We were being completely unsuccessful. We were probably reaching about 20 to 30,000 patients out of about, well, now we're saying about 30 to 45 million people need the product. So clearly we were not reaching the patients that we wanted to reach at that time. So then the question was, sort of to go back, what could we be doing differently? And this is in 2006. And there's a number of things we did, but one of the key things we did, we looked at, is anybody right now successfully delivering HIV medications to the poorest countries of the world? And the answer was yes, there were people doing it, but they weren't in the US, they weren't in Europe, it was the companies in India that were doing it. And so then the question was, can we use that business model to actually deliver our medicines into the poor countries around the world? And the answer was probably not, because we weren't set up as a business to do that. So then the next logical place to go is, well, can we work with them to do this? And so we went through this thought experiment. Well, to do that, we would need to respect their business model, and they would need to respect our business model. And that's where the whole idea of partnership came. And so we thought, well, what if we were to license our products to Indian companies, not just one, but multiple Indian companies, provide a technology transfer to give them the starting point in terms of the manufacturing, provide a broad territory of the countries that we really wanted to get our product into, and a low royalty rate that we could actually collect from the various companies to support our activities, because we still need to do a lot of the registration work, the pharmacovigilance work in the countries. That was the hypothesis. We tested this around, we kicked this around. People were concerned, well, what about diversion of product? What about quality of product? And we really looked at that, and we said that we don't see any example where diversion is a real issue. We don't see any examples where quality has been an issue with these particular companies. So we said, let's try this. Why not? We're a scientific company. We develop hypotheses and then we test it. So we flew to India and we contacted all the various companies, and we signed multiple licensing deals that were around the terms I mentioned, which is technology transfer. It covers now about 112 countries, I think, for HIV, and I'll talk about hepatitis C in a second. And we said, let's see how this works. And at the time, our cost of manufacturing, we were selling at our cost of manufacturing and distribution, so basically no profit, was about $17. And as I mentioned, we're reaching about 30,000 patients. Today, due to the work of our Indian partners, the price has dropped. We're seeing prices as low as $4. So it's over 80% reduction in cost, and we're reaching over 8 million patients. So every single day, a patient in the poorest countries of the world, 8 million people will take a pill produced by our Indian partners as part of this collaboration. So it's been phenomenally successful. We've seen no problems in quality, no problems in diversion, and it's been a remarkable success story for us. Why has this been successful? Again, it goes back to the business model. We are an innovative company, we're an innovator company, as are our Indian partners. I remember sitting with Satya, and you probably remember this evening back in Hyderabad, about 10 years ago now. It's almost 10 years ago, the anniversary. Sitting at the table with the management team, this was Matrix at the time, and it was remarkable. Every single one of them, I believe, was a process chemist or had a chemistry background. That is the heart and soul of the innovative model of the Indian industry. Because as I mentioned, we provide a technology transfer. That's the starting point. They take that. How do they compete? They compete on process chemistry, high quality, lower margin, high volume business. And that's exactly what happened in HIV. So fast forward to hepatitis C, with major breakthrough in hepatitis C, where we can now cure the disease with a very simple, safe, tolerable regimen, curing over 90% of patients. We have a next generation product that will be launched in about 6 months. There are 6 different genotypes for hepatitis C. We'll have a single course of therapy for all 6 genotypes, dramatically simplifying the treatment of hepatitis C. But the challenges with hepatitis C, they're similar to HIV. A lot of the people infected with hepatitis C globally are very, very poor, living in very, very poor countries. So the question with hepatitis C was, how are we going to get the products to those patients? Well, fortunately, we've had the experience with HIV. So we said, well, let's look at what we've done in HIV. Can we do this with hepatitis C? So we challenged ourselves, and sure, why not? Let's do this. So we did the same thing, reached out to our partners in India, and we now have signed 11 license agreements with the major companies in India. I think this time we were a little bit different than we did in HIV, where we actually, instead of making it to anybody, we really wanted to pick the high quality companies based on the experience we've had and the partnerships we developed. We licensed our existing products. We've licensed our future pipeline products, as we've done with HIV. It's not just our old existing products. We always launch the next generation as part of these partnerships. It's been successful already. So far with hepatitis C, we are seeing that our partners are producing product, they're making product available, and what we expect is we'll see the prices coming down as the volumes go up and the demand grows for these products. Moving forward particularly with hepatitis C, we see the challenge is going to be, unlike HIV, the global awareness is lower for hepatitis C. The funding mechanisms don't exist for hepatitis C. A huge success, part of the success of HIV was global funding. We don't have that with hepatitis C. And then also working on education of the provider workforce, the healthcare providers. And as I look at these partnerships, these are areas that we are really, us and our partners are keen to work together. So this is not just a partnership where there's a technology transfer, they provide versions of our product from India. We go, we're going to work together and work on some of the other challenges of hepatitis C, because these partnerships can flourish. And as Rajiv said, where can this go? This can go a lot of places. So in terms of where the discussions are going, we are talking about R&D. We're talking about working together on development of not just the existing products and improving upon them, but other areas that we can work together on new products for HIV, for hepatitis C. We're talking about oncology. We're talking about other disease areas, because this model has proven to work for these two areas. Why can't it work in other disease areas? Why can't we take this model right now and start working together on R&D for diseases that we don't have those opportunities for? And can this model work in other areas? We have had interest in areas of energy, areas of food, areas of products in particular, where it's not a commodity product that's a nice to have. This model works really well when you talk about products, science, and innovation that can benefit poor people who otherwise wouldn't have access without this model. So that is really what we're doing. That is how the partnership works. I'm going to conclude my remarks there, because I know there'll be lots of questions, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Greg. And just to say one short sentence, which is that, Prime Minister Modi keeps saying, and all of us know that if India has to sort of grow and, go green and also grow rapidly and be inclusive and cover the 1.25 billion people that we got here, we've got to leapfrog. And we've got to leapfrog in technology, in not just this, but several sectors. I think this is why I think this is such an important thing, as what you pointed out, that if we can actually take this model to energy and combine science, innovation, technology, and products, I think that's the sort of exciting thing about this model. So thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Dr. Satyanarayan Chava, whom I have not had the pleasure to meet before. He's of course a top-rate scientist, because he's got 75 patents to his name. He is currently the CEO of at Laurus Labs. I suppose he is here because he was heading metrics in some sense when the license agreement might have taken place. Dr. Chava, to give us the Indian point of view and how the Indian companies have benefited and are now taking this forward.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank ORF for organizing such a powerful meeting here, which will influence decision makers in many sectors. In the morning, Ambassador Richard Verma is spending a lot of time on defense deals, making in India and all. If you want to write 3 priorities for the global citizens, I would say the first and foremost priority is safety. Next one is health, and third one is prosperity. These are my preferences. You can't change the order. The first is safe. We have to make world a safer place, and then we have to make world a healthier place, and then the prosperity comes. So in this context of partnership between Indo-US companies in making a world a healthier place, what is meant by innovation? How to define innovation? If you look at value of a product varies slightly between various geographies. Value of a service varies significantly when you move from one territory to another territory. But value of knowledge remains same irrespective of where you offer the knowledge. That's the power of innovation. How to define the innovative level of Gilead? Greg, I'm saying, taking some numbers from your published one. So there are about 7,000 team members at Gilead, and they're little over $20 billion in sales, right, when the numbers were there. So revenue per employee at Gilead is $3 million. That is on par with Microsoft. If you look at the revenue per employee for a very successful Indian pharmaceutical company is $250,000. What does it mean? The Indian companies are not innovative. Only US companies are innovative. The level of service offered by Indian companies in India is measured differently from level of service offered by US companies in their territory. How to benefit from their knowledge and innovation for the emerging markets? The Access program was initiated by Gilead almost a decade back. And nowadays, this Access program is no more called Access program, it's called a Gilead program, because they were leading the Access program across the globe. And we were fortunate to partner with Gilead in the initial days itself. Recently, every year, 1 million new treatment patients are added in HIV. In 2015, the target is to treat almost 15, 16 million people using the majority access programs. And Gilead product is used half of the HIV patient across the emerging markets. And we are also fortunate to make 3 million patient treatments per year using Gilead access program. That is, every second patient you having access using Gilead molecule, we're fortunate to make half of that. I think, first of all, I would like to congratulate Gilead for their tremendous support in that. And when it comes to hepatitis C, I think if one patient is getting treatment in the advanced markets, there are at least 3 patients getting treatment in the emerging markets for hepatitis C. That is the biggest contribution Gilead is doing to the emerging world by allowing partners like us in using their innovation, using their knowledge to provide cost-effective treatment to the needy people across the globe. They're doing very wisely. They are not giving it to 1 or 2 partners so that there will be a monopoly or duopoly. So they are giving it to a bunch of capable companies like us. And there is a inbuilt competitive mechanism in the license program itself, so that the value of the license is maintained by providing quality and cost-effective treatment to the hepatitis C program. And they're also thinking to extend this access program to other therapies, maybe hepatitis B, when their innovative treatment is available in the market. I'm sure we request them to look into other areas like oncology also to be added into the access program. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you a lot. Thank you very much, Dr. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Mr. Keshav Desiraju, and I've met him before. He doesn't, and of course he wouldn't remember me, but first time I had heard about him was actually through my wife, who runs an NGO which looks after leprosy patients who've been cured, but she had gone and met him in the Ministry of Health and came back saying, "My God, you must go and meet this person." And then I had the fortune to go and meet him at a common friend's house, Disha Agarwal. And so, Mr. Keshav Raju really combines the best, as you say, that that in our bureaucracy that we have to offer. He's had several assignments. He retired as the Secretary of the Health Department, with the additional secretary there as well. He's been an alumna of Bombay, Harvard, Cambridge, and Cambridge. So I have great anticipation. I invite you to speak.
Thank you very much for those very kind words, and thank you to ORF for this invitation to speak. I would just like to make a few points. Technology transfer will happen. Business to business interactions will happen, because that is the way of business. And the Gilead model, which we've been hearing about, is one of many ways of doing it. It's clearly needed, and like-minded people clearly have found each other. And what we see today is a successful application of research, R&D efforts in one country, entrepreneurial spirits in another country, the capacity to adapt, and build on learnings elsewhere. But the point I'm trying to make is that is going to happen anyway, and it's the easy part of what we are talking about. But I'd like to call attention to three, just for argument's sake, 3 areas of work which are going to impact very seriously on the capacity of technology transfer to deliver, and for really remarkable forward steps to be taken. And the first of these is the whole business of human resources. Technology transfer in the absence of appropriately trained and skilled human resources to handle that technology is going to be limited. And we know this very well in the health sector. Mr. Alton in his remarks used a phrase, the education of the provider workforce. This indeed is a very, very big problem, and we would be mistaken if we thought that we could substitute human resources with technology. This is not to dispute for a moment the enormous potential of technology to transform the way healthcare is delivered at the margin, but you still need human resources of some appropriate training to be delivering that care. And this is a very big problem area in India. The numbers don't add up. We produce enormous numbers of some categories of persons whom we don't really need, like dentists and pharmacists. We don't produce anywhere near the required number of people we do need. Where we produce them, we don't have them in the locations we need them. And there are a whole range of people broadly in the allied health sector where we simply have nowhere near the correct numbers. So in our correct assessment that more technology transfer is needed, let us remember that we need the health sector also needs the human resource to be able to deliver this. Further, in the specific units where the technologies are being transferred to, also need appropriately qualified persons. In fact, the government's call for skill development, I think, is hugely important because it addresses a very, very important gap area. We just do not have people with the necessary skills needed to be able to form the workforce that will work within this framework of technology transfer. So there is this huge area of human resources and what we lack. The second potential obstacle, and this is particularly important in the context of drug development and manufacture, is the question of reach. Now, what is the basic principle of universal health care? Affordable, accessible, efficacious care. That applies to drugs also. Affordable, accessible, affordable, efficacious drugs. Now, let us not forget that India is battling both communicable and non-communicable diseases at the same time. Our range and requirement of medicinal preparations is vast. Non-communicable diseases need long-term, possibly lifetime management, which means drug availability on a lifetime basis. The structure of primary health care in India is flawed. Our states vary enormously in the way they perform on primary health care, but by and large, we do not have a strong and robust public sector primary health care system. So, it is through this system that we have to reach drugs and medicinal preparations and everything else to our people. The numbers are baffling. So, I think while certainly we look to every kind of technology transfer, we look to new drugs and pharmaceutical products becoming available, the linked problem is, are we ever going to have them in the volumes that are needed? And are we ever going to be able to afford universal health care, which presumes that these would be made available to certainly a substantial bulk of India's population free of cost? So that is a very, very big issue. And the third and last issue, which I think is again very relevant to this discussion, is the whole question of research. Now, at some point, India must stop just being a recipient of technology transfer. And research is, where it is done, is patchily done. The Indian Council of Medical Research, which initially was supposed to be the catalyst for all this, does not do it. Our universities, by and large, have stopped being major research facilities. Such research as is happening is in the private R&D efforts of private pharma companies. Necessary, important, and as I said, whatever is happening there. But when and how is India going to be able to develop the huge research capacity that it needs to be able to generate this process itself? Because given, linked to what I said earlier about the need for much greater reach in what we are doing, that research needs to be happening here. that research, and that research also requires a new generation of appropriately skilled persons who are in a position to undertake research. And this takes us back to issues involving school and college education, much larger issues. But it is a very big issue, because otherwise the technology transfer will meet its own natural limits, because we will not be able to progress beyond that unless we are in a position to undertake the further researches that are needed to keep that chain of technology transfer moving. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Desi Raju, because you remind me of something which I discussed once with Dr. Raghunath Mashelkar, and I put it to you that he tried, as you know, in the National Chemical Labs in Pune, this wonderful model of trying to bring the private and public sector together. And I dare say, the question that comes to my mind is, for Greg Alton and the Gilead team, is that can they and their licensees actually take that step forward and combine their strengths with the public sector, science and technology division, establishment in India, and therefore bridge this gap, which and overcome this huge deficiency that you're talking about. And absolutely right. We do not produce anywhere near the number that we need, but can we create this hybrid? And that might be the huge next step that we in India need to produce the sort of research and advances that, if they are produced in the private sector, may not see the sort of efficacy and reach as you are talking about. So thank you very much for triggering that thought, and something that I put forward here. Before I introduce our next speaker, who and I have been partners in crime for a long time, I must preface it by saying that it's so good to see Ron Summers and people like Claudio sitting in the back, who have sort of bridged, who have come over from the side of making constant complaints between India and US, demands and complaints, and saying that you are not doing this, and the other side saying you are not doing this, to a situation we are trying to find solutions, to find sort of solutions where we can work together. And I remember the fact in time when I was involved in the trade policy dialogue and the sort of private public policy, whatever, this constant sort of charges at each other, and thankfully that was partly behind us. And the best person suited to show us the way forward is Ron, being the head of USIBC for 2 decades or more, ever since it was founded. He's now doing his own thing. He's got his consultancy, his India First Group, and which is wonderful, because I have now established my foundation, which is called Pehle India. So from India First and Pehle India, let me invite Ron to speak. Ron.
Well, thank you, Rajiv, and thank you, panelists, because you've really teed up the conversation in a manner where I'm just going to summarize really what we've heard. And I want to thank the ORF for giving us this platform. This is an extraordinary opportunity to amplify what I think is a very positive story. Rajiv, you'll hear no whining from me today. I'm not complaining at all. I think we're on the right track. We've heard a lot this morning from the ambassador about the US-India strategic partnership. Last night we heard from Jayant Sinha, the minister, regarding how the lines are blurring between the United States and India. And it's really quite extraordinary. And all of us have known each other for many, many years. And when you think about how close we are now, where we can be very frank and candid with one another, and be able to solve and tackle real challenges and take them on full throttle, that is really a remarkable achievement that we've all combined together over the last 2 decades to be able to pull together where we're now heading. And so let me just put a couple of extra points on the partnership concept that Ambassador and Ashley Tellis were talking about this morning. Technology, innovation, and know-how. I mean, we talk about Jugaad, we talk about know-how. Let me just give you the example I think that is personified in this particular model. We have a company that has a molecule. They have a discovery. It's a significant discovery. It's a life-saving discovery. And then we have companies in India, as Greg identified, that have this extraordinary supply chain logistics in places that are so complex that American companies have never even ventured there. Parts of sub-Saharan Africa, where Indian companies have been doing business for literally decades and decades and centuries. And then the other wonderful capability in India And I didn't hear enough of the word entrepreneurial today, but that capability to manufacture the highest quality at the lowest possible cost. And that is why India is the pharmacy of the world. And what does that mean when you combine all those together? The molecules, the supply chain logistics, these access to complex markets, the ability to manufacture high quality at low cost, it results in dramatic, significant savings. And that means expanding access vastly. You're getting medicine to people. Mr. Secretary, I appreciate your comments, but you're getting medicine to people that never otherwise could have even hoped to have that pill by combining in this partnership format that we're describing today, these licensing partnerships. And Rajiv, I agree with you. I think it's so significant that we see these succeed. I just want to throw out a couple of facts. Fact, of all the medicines sold in the United States, as much as 70% of the active ingredients are sourced from India. Satya, congratulations. Companies like yours are providing the active ingredients to as much as 70% of all active ingredients going to America. And when you look on your pharmacy shelf at a CVS or a Walgreens in the United States and you look at the generic opportunities there, 1 out of 3 of those generics are sourced from India. That's amazing. And yet somehow an image was created, and Rajiv, you talked about the controversy. An image was created where the Indian companies were concocting secret medicines in the back room, and there was a quality problem. My goodness. 1 out of 3 generics sold in the United States are made and sourced from India, and 70% of the active ingredients going into generics in the United States are sourced from India. This is significant. The FDA Commissioner, Margaret Hamburg, cited a very important fact. Between 2003 and 2012, in a 10-year period, $1.2 trillion in savings to the healthcare system in the United States was achieved by accessing these generic drugs. That's thanks to India, that kind of savings. And so when you look at the healthcare systems around the world, we need to really be partnering the United States and India, molecules, research, development, these logistics, these access to complex markets, to be able to reduce the healthcare burden for not just India and the United States, but from around the world. And that's where I think this partnership is really taking wings here and lifting off. Now, Rajiv, let me talk about a little history here, because the relationship between the United States and India hit a real bump in the road. And many of you remember this. We were all part of this together. Back in about 2008 timeframe, there were 2 tracks that were created. We've heard about the Gilead track, and I'll reiterate the Gilead track in a minute, which was, how do we get life-saving medicines to the people who need them most? That was one track. The other track, you may remember well, was when a cancer drug was being sold in India by a European company, and the government of India said, my goodness, can't we negotiate a lower price? And that European company said, no, we are going to stick to our guns. And here's the question. When you have life-extending treatment and cures, can it be, should it be denied to the vast majority of people? That's the great moral question here. And you might remember there was a drug called Nexivar that was at a cost of about $6,000 per month for your dosage treatment that could be made in India generically for $120. And there was an inflexibility to negotiate a price differential where we could come to some accommodation. And the courts in India opined that the WTO allows for the challenge of such a patent so that medicines like this could be made available to the poor. And that's the Supreme Court of India. And my goodness, as the president of US-India Business Council at that time, that created a huge ripple in the US-India relationship. Not that this was a US drug at the time, it was a European drug, but the concern was, oh my goodness, is this going to start a domino effect down the line for many American products from the American pharmaceutical industry? And it became a very contentious issue, and I would argue really strained the relationship at the time. That was one track. Stand your guns, keep to your prices, and ultimately what that means is we're denying medical treatment to people who need it most. The other track that we've heard of this morning was, how do we get our treatment to people the most effectively and efficaciously? Wow, what a different track. And what you do is you develop partnerships with Matrix and with Loris Labs and with other great pharmaceutical companies, and driven by a sense of urgency. Now let me just give you the numbers, the differential. 35 million people infected worldwide with HIV. With hepatitis C, it's 170 million people worldwide. So 5 times as many people infected by hepatitis C than HIV, and that 5 times as many, imagine just the magnitude of that. And so how do you create the same sense of urgency? So here we have a model with the Gilead company, Gilead Sciences, where we have innovation in its best sense, combining with innovation in India in its best sense, logistics, supply chain, access to complex markets around the world, and we partner together and we deliver willingly and expeditiously and as urgently as possible with the finest Indian firms to get medical treatment to people who need it most. And as Greg mentioned, 35 million people infected worldwide with HIV, 8 million every day are taking a product that is part of the model that we're discussing. That's with the HIV. Fast forward to the hepatitis C, we're talking again a much greater magnitude. 170 million people infected worldwide. In India, that means about 12 to 18 million people, many of whom don't even know they may have been infected. They're carrying the virus that will one day erupt into greater problems. And so in September 2014, really just a year ago today, Rajiv, we were all together, the Make in India partnership licenses were announced in Delhi. Now, Mr. Secretary, I would argue that when you get to the technology transfer aspect, that's going to enable a whole new relationship in R&D for everyone, for Gilead, for their 11 Indian partners. And the scale of that is going to deepen and develop an extraordinary engine of R&D that's now global. This is the licensing model that we're talking about. So when the manufacture of the generic Sovaldi was announced a year ago, just imagine what that means to people who are infected. Just think about the difference here. We're talking about 1 pill a day. I have a Tylenol caplet in my pocket. This is Tylenol, but that's a Tylenol caplet. 1 pill of about this size. Greg, is it about that size? 1 pill a day for 12 weeks. If you have a difficult problems, maybe 24 weeks, but at the end of that, you're cured of the hepatitis C virus. What an extraordinary thing. Now, how do we get it to the people? And that's the real challenge. Because when you think of the numbers, the magnitude, 12 to 18 million people in India, 170 million people worldwide, there has to be a new sense of urgency about getting this treatment to the people. And when you think about the history of HIV, how did we create that sense of urgency for that disease? And now how do we repeat that same sense of urgency for hepatitis C? Now, we've been doing a little research, and this is the real great challenge that I seek ORF's input on and everyone's input on. You get the pyramid. The people at the top of the pyramid are going to go out to the market and buy the product, cash and carry. They're going to get treated. The people in the middle of the pyramid, they're going to find a way through their employers to get involved in programs, maybe Indian Railways, the Indian military, large employers in India. Is there some way to access treatment and cure? But at the bottom of the pyramid, Where do we get the money? And Mr. Secretary, this is the idea that I want to just throw out there to the team. We talk about the primary healthcare system in India and the need to be making it more robust. We're talking about the skilling of technicians to be able to test and treat. Can we not access some of the CSR money that is available in the 2% CSR tax? Can we not even make this into a defense offset where we treat this kind of issue as a matter of national urgency and national security? And this is something that we need to be pursuing together. The large employers may take advantage and treat their own staff, but at the bottom of the pyramid, we need to find financial resources to help people that would never otherwise have access to the treatment simply because of the fact they can't afford it. Even at these reduced rates, we're talking about treatment at the range of 25,000 rupees. The diagnostics, in addition to that, is another 25,000 rupees. 50,000 rupees gives you the treatment, but we all know at the bottom of the pyramid, that is unreachable. So we need to find resources to be able to provide to those people who cannot reach that far. Could it be the CSR budget? Could it be a clever defense offset? Let me close by just saying that the model is so important because other medicines, other treatment options, absolutely. If we succeed here, other companies will follow suit. Other technologies, why not green technologies? Why not clean water? Why not cleaning the Ganga? Agricultural technologies. These voluntary licensing partnerships could revolutionize the way the United States and India solve global challenges, not just in India, not just in the United States, but around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ron, and thanks for pointing us in the sort of direction forward. Just the question that will arise, which I think Mr. Desiraju will raise and others will raise too, which is that isn't it the responsibility of the government in any country to provide both universal health and primary basic education? And can we not aspire for that in our country? And do we need? But at the same time, if we can't because we are strapped for resources, then of course the CSR model is the one to go forward. And I think we should try and explore that as we take it forward, because CSR for health is a nice slogan in some sense, because I think that's what we can do. So thanks for pointing us to in that direction. But the fact is that that today in this world, when more and more companies are not working to maximize profits, and when more and more companies are working to maximize social purpose, and which is now being studied very carefully in the US actually, I think it's a challenge that can be and should be taken up quite easily by Gilead and its licensees in the country, in India. So thanks a lot. And before we close the session, I'm sure there are some questions and some comments for the eminent panelists here. You would introduce yourself, sir, and then and ask the question.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you very much. My name is Satish Inamdar, formerly of the Air Force, and my interest in this particular deliberation was mainly because I also take medicines like everybody else does, and secondly because I sit on the US-India Strategic Dialogue. It happens twice a year, and we are shortly off to the US for this. And I wanted to pick up some points and some inputs from this deliberation this morning. That's why I'm here. My question is, I think to the entire panel, the chair may decide who's to answer it, is the recent last few months news that's been trickling down on quote unquote nailing the myth of cholesterol as a deadly enemy, and the preponderance of vastatin drugs produced all over the world, including the US, India, everywhere. I'm not a doctor. I know nothing about it. But this is what I read, and this is what I've discussed in the last few weeks internally. I have two questions. One is, how does, it's not specifically pointed at Gilead, it's just the drug manufacturers globally. How does this drug manufacturing lobby propose to address this? Is there any substance in this nailing of the myth, quote unquote? And if there is, how does it plan to address it in the areas of research and development and marketing? Second question is, how does this Indo-US partnership plan to or hope to or proposes to address this issue vis-a-vis India? And at this point, was very eloquently made just now that in the area of innovation and expanding healthcare, I think the respective governments, including Government of India, they should be spearheading this in their own right, in their own strengths, not depend on, unless you are short of resources and funding, but this should be the primary and sole responsibility of the state.
Yeah. Any others at this
Thank
time?
you.
My name is S.C. Tripathi, retired civil servant. My question is to Keshav Desiraju. He mentioned about affordability and accessibility. It seems to me that the indigenous system of medicine and healthcare is completely out of this whole discussion. So, does he think that there can be affordability and accessibility by keeping the indigenous system completely out of the issue?
Thank you.
So my name is Vijay Chandru. I come from Bangalore. I run a company called Strand Genomics. And the elephant in the room really is how much India spends on public health. And I think Secretary Desiraju had alluded to the challenge here. I think this cannot go on with 1% of the GDP allocated to public health.
Yeah.
I think the challenge of reach, access, and so on will continue to be a huge challenge unless that is addressed. And I think there just has to be a change there. We are all going to see in a week's time the Lancet issue come out, and we will all then think about this issue again. But that is the elephant in the room. Right. Thank you.
My question is to Secretary Keshav. Okay. The problem about the trained manpower, he has talked about human resources. I must tell you, wherever in India, government has spent enough money in human resource development, considering IITs or certain good universities or All India Institute of Medical Sciences or any good medical school, engineering school or universities, I think India has done a great service to the nation, and those people have made names all over the world. The problem has been that our state universities and state institutions are not being well funded. And therefore, the quality has gone down from the state institutions. Still, the federally funded IITs or central universities are doing good job. They are producing good manpower. I did not identify myself. I am Professor Rakesh Bhatnagar from Jawaharlal Nehru University. I teach biotechnology there. We have produced great manpower. They are CEOs of the companies in India as well as in United States.
Okay.
For the last 30 years, we have been training people in biotechnology.
And so the question is?
Funding to the state institutions has not taken place.
Okay.
And
so
therefore...
Same question of budget.
Exactly.
Budget for education, budget for health.
Budget for science.
Yeah, okay, budget for science. And
national laboratories are becoming the universities to produce PhDs, not the products, and universities are dying of the funds.
Sure.
Thank
but
you.
also there is, before I hand it over to the panel, please, which is that, do sit down, and I'm a professor myself, which is that there is a situation about the research culture in the universities, even in our best. And you would agree that that also requires a little bit of doing. So of course the budget is a problem, but the second problem also exists. And even from our best universities and institutions, you don't get the research output that you would expect. So I think all of that is a very complex situation that we will address. So I'm going to ask the panelists now really to make some closing remarks, and in that process also respond to the questions that have been raised or the comments. So can I go with you, Greg, first?
Sure. I think
I'll just go in that order.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think one of the questions was, in terms of the medicines and the investments we're making in drugs, are they delivering value? I think that was basically what the question is. And I think that we as an R&D industry, it's our responsibility to conduct and create clinical trials that have endpoints that are meaningful and can answer those questions. It can't always be done, but we need to, and we also need to make sure we do those clinical trials in settings that are representative of the people that we're trying to reach, so we can actually have the confidence in those endpoints. I don't know specifically the answer to the question you're asking, because I'm not an expert in that area, but I can tell you in the areas that we work in terms of HIV and hepatitis, we run clinical trials in broad patient populations with the best endpoints possible. We follow those long term, and we also we repeat those by tracking data in real life to actually really demonstrate the value that the products are bringing. And what I can tell you is that in the area of HIV and hepatitis C, the value is there. That the patients are benefiting in hepatitis C. Their livers are being preserved. Their fibrosis is reversing, and all the other complications tend to go away. And it's the same with HIV. So I want to just, that's how I'll comment on that. I just want to make one comment, just completely agree with Mr. If I can pronounce it, Desraju, on the concept that a technology transfer isn't going to solve all the problems. I think that we have to be very clear about that technology transfer or sort of managing this whole challenge between intellectual property and access, that is one key component of the problem that we can solve, and that will bring down prices, it will broaden the distribution, as Ron said. But we do need to be realistic on having qualified healthcare providers. We need to have budgets. We need to have awareness. All these things don't go away with the technology transfer, and that is why one of the things that we really come back to in terms of the partnerships that we have is leveraging each other's strengths, not just to deliver high quality, low cost product, but to take on all those other challenges. That is why we were very clear. These are partnerships that go much beyond just delivery of low cost drugs. Thank you.
Sean?
I'd like to answer Professor's question of quality of education in the country. See, we're only talking about investment in infrastructure, 4-lane roads, 6-lane roads, high-speed train network, and broadband and all. But we should start measuring our infrastructure growth, how much we invest in primary education. See, investing in university education does not solve the core problem. We are only scratching the surface. You don't invest in primary education, invest in best universities will not solve the problem. So I think most of the government-funded schools, universities are ill-funded, I would say. So there is a time for the policymakers to invest significantly into primary education. Then only we could start measuring when we become a developed society. So unless we start funding the primary education, I think difficult to measure when we will become a developed society. Suppose we start funding next year, it will take 20 years for us to become a developed society, because that is the time a primary education, a student will become a graduate student, then we become a developed society. That's my feeling.
Thank you. Thank you. Just Professor Bhatnagara's point, I mean, there's absolutely no disagreement with what Mr. Chava said. We have a very distinguished former education secretary here who I'm sure will agree with us that till such time as we fix school education, and that is not going to be easy, we can forget about university education. And I think that is the realization we all need. Two other very quick points. Indian systems of medicine, yes, of course, but then for 60 years we have consciously turned our backs on it. It is in the last 15, 20 years, we look at what we call the Ayush systems as a kind of niche area. But healthcare in India, led by the Medical Council and the Indian Medical Association, is driven by allopaths. And as long as that continues, and as long as they continue to have a stranglehold on health and medical education, this is going to continue to be the case. And even having a separate ministry now for the Indian citizens, for the Indian systems, is not really going to make a difference. But we do have, sir, huge numbers of qualified Ayurveda and Unani and Siddha doctors around the country whom we simply do not use. Some efforts have been made under the National Rural Health Mission to co-locate them, but it hasn't really served its purpose. And then Vijay's question about funding, yes, that is the very, very big question. Are we spending enough? The health spend in India is said to be about 4% of GDP, of which 3% is out-of-pocket private and 1% is government. Of this 1%, about 30% is central and 60-70% is from the states. That is the big debate right now. Nothing that the government has said recently gives me any confidence that they're actually serious about increasing the public spending in health. Sir, thank you.
Ron.
Very quickly, I think on 3 issues. Obviously, we need to be spending more money on health care, but I'm not confident that there's any money in the exchequer to be able to dedicate to the spending on health care. So the innovation that we all need to be part of here is how do we mobilize pockets of money, these massive amounts of resources, and I'm suggesting that right now we do have that CSR tax. Every company has to put 2% of their net profit into a pocket somewhere. And yes, some of it's going to go into schooling, and some of it's going to go into clinics, and some of it's going to go into other good social responsibility, but we need to channelize it in a very effective way. I think it's important to think about how do we do what the Rotary accomplished in eradicating polio in India? How do we create small niche pharmacies that are part of existing institutions, part of the network that already exists in India? Maybe it's the State Bank of India branch, but how do we find ways where we have trained technicians that can dispense these affordable drugs at effective prices, and then be able to administer diagnostics, and then at the end of a 12-week, 24-week period, pronounce a patient as cured? What an extraordinary idea. And where does that money come from with the absence of government funding? It could come from CSR. It could come from corporate social responsibility from large corporates that want to be extra generous. It could come from something innovative like saying this is a matter of national security. Let's make this a priority issue for the military and the veterans of families. And make this into a defense offset, and then leave those same clinics open on weekends to serve the communities that are contiguous to military bases. We need to be thinking about what should we do now in the absence of waiting for the government to do something. On skilling, we always need to do more on skilling. And in fact, I think it's the one area that all of us need to be thinking about how much more we can do together. But I have to say, Satya, when I look at your workforce at your company, when I look at the 10 other Indian partner companies that are partners with Gilead, boy, the talent that is existing in those companies is extraordinary. And that's why India has become the pharmacy of the world. So yes, we need to do more, but my goodness, talent is brewing here. And now we need to capitalize and harness that energy and help get treatment to people who need it most. Last point is, lives are at stake. We need to create a sense of urgency. We need to create awareness. Can we not go to the Rotary, the Lions Clubs, and other places to say, we now have this cure, let us help you get to testing, whether you're positive or negative, and then get you into treatment. That's our next focus. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. And ladies and gentlemen, before we close this, I want to make 3 quick remarks. One, that I think Gilead gives me the hope that we are now could enter into the age of what we call the conscious capitalism, which is a movement now in some parts of the world, and which I think should be a movement in India as well, where, as I said, companies can come forward to not maximize profits but maximize social return, and that would be a good thing to do. And I think this is what you're doing in some sense. Gilead gives me, and therefore the Gilead model needs to be propagated as far and wide as possible. The second point that I wanted to make was from what Mr. Tripathi said, is that so far in our country, the indigenous systems of medicine and the modern medicines have been really treated as a trade-off, as a conflictual situation. And I think, and I don't know how many of us know, that something called Vicks, which we all use for our cold, is actually a Ayurvedic preparation being sold by a multinational Procter & Gamble now. It was earlier sold by Richardson Hindustan, but then it was taken over by Procter & Gamble. And Gurucharan Das would tell you that that's what made him the best CEO in the world in the eyes of Procter & Gamble because of the sale that Vicks has. I'm offering that again as the same win-win model here, between the modern medicines and the Ayush and the Ayurvedic system, because there are some hidden nuggets there, which if are left alone to the public sector, as is being done in India today, the Central Drug Research Institute, etc., will not succeed. Maybe it's time for the modern medicine producers to turn their eye towards this and create again a synergy where none exists. And the final point, just to endorse what Ron has been saying, is that I think, but just going beyond Ron, which is that yes, we need to spread the awareness about how urgent the situation is, but Ron, that will take an organized effort and will not happen by the way. And that is what we need to do today. And I think again it will be companies like Gilead and your licensees who should get together in a coalition for spreading the awareness of what the health situation is in this country and how we will not be able to go forward in any manner if we don't take care of that bottom of the pyramid where the health and education is not what we need today. So, ladies and gentlemen, with that, I hope you'll join me in thanking the panelists for a very good presentation. Call it end of the day.
Good afternoon. We're done with the morning and we've officially started the afternoon. We move now to our second panel, which is titled Raising Awareness, Seizing the Urgency, Mobilizing the Resources. Frankly, when it comes to public health, we've discussed and all agreed on raising awareness and seizing urgency in the discussion we had yesterday with Minister Sinha and this morning. This panel focuses more on the third of the three imperatives, which is mobilizing resources. There's an ancient saying that all the world's problems can be found in India, and all the world's solutions can also be found in India. Actually, that's not an ancient saying, I just made it up. But it sounds nice, and it sounds appropriate for what we're here to discuss. If you look at India's population, and if you look at the sheer numbers in India, the entire gamut of the world's public health challenge can, in a sense, be found in India. There are huge numbers for almost any disease. HIV and Hep C, as we've discussed this morning, tuberculosis, which remains a big killer, maternal and child health diseases, the whole gamut of them, even the emerging non-communicable and lifestyle diseases which are posing a problem for our population. It's not as if solutions to these in terms of medicines, innovations, technologies are not available. They are increasingly available. It's not as if money to access all of those innovations and technologies and solutions is not available. Even that is available. Except the bridge between the solutions, the resources, the logistical and financial bridges, and the target audience, those who need it most, that link doesn't exist in many cases. And what this panel is going to focus on is how to mobilize those resources and build those links so that the right people get the right technology, the right medical solutions, the right health solutions at the right price at the right time. We have three panelists here. We should have had four, but Dr. Sunil Solomon was unfortunately rained out, in a sense. He's stuck in Chennai because, as you know, flights are not taking off from Chennai because of the terrible floods there. So he's had to drop out, unfortunately. But we do have three very engaging speakers. Dr. Ratin Roy, whose bio is before you. He's worked at the UNDP previously in Bangkok, in Brazil. Why did you come back? Okay. He's now a director of the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. He's one of India's most thoughtful voices on public finance. There is Ratna Vishwanathan, who is a former civil servant, has worked at Oxfam and VSO, and is now CEO of the Microfinance Network, MFIN. Finally, we have Nirupama Sundarajan, Senior Fellow at the Pele India Foundation. She's a specialist in financial sector reform and has worked for ICRIA, the Bank of India, and various institutions. I'd like to start by asking Ratna to come up and make the first presentation. If she could address issues of how microfinance can benefit the end consumer of medicines and public health solutions, what regulatory challenges she faces in her work, how can we mobilize not just microfinance but CSR budgets of small and big corporations and institutions. Ratna, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here, Ashok, because these are areas that, having worked with people in low-income segments, things like medical intervention and access to low-cost medical options is something that we deal a lot with on a daily basis. I was late coming into the conversation, but whatever I heard, we've been talking a lot about technology transfer, bringing in different, generic drugs that we export and then that come back to us in the form that we finally end up consuming them, all of that. One of the interesting statistics that I came across was that today, 16 to 17% of the GDP is from manufacturing, and of this, 0.2% is for manufacturing of medical equipment. So today, we are in a state where we are exporting huge amounts of expensive medical equipment, which if we were to step up, and I think the government is going to step up by 2022 to make this 25%, and that in itself would be a great step forward in terms of bringing down the cost of medicine, access to health at low cost. We talk about technology, we talk about digital interventions. Unless we look at it from a bottom-up approach, digital interventions and technological interventions really will not help in the sense that they do not percolate at affordable costs to people who need them the most. Because in terms of morbidity, it is the bottom of the pyramid that really actually gets the end of the stick far more than anybody else. But for instance, I deal with people who live in income segments of less than 1,20,000 per annum. And how do they access health? So we have the microfinance sector, for instance. We're talking about different forms of innovative intervention. What does microfinance do? So we have a lot of companies. They are for-profit companies. They're in the space making the money that they are investing in the space. But the ones that are above 500 crores use CSR in a very innovative way. They either use their own CSR budget for bringing low-cost medical help to clients, and these are all low-income clients. They tie up with hospitals and the large ones, it's not just the small ones, on various accounts. So if you are an MFI client and you've tied up with certain hospitals, they will give you medical assistance at very low cost or set up free camps for you. Now these are things, and they also link people, low-income segment people, to hospital CSR programs. So that, I think, is a very good way of leveraging cost because you have to use the CSR budget, you have to deliver medical assistance to certain segments, and that's one way of tying up loose ends to make sure that there is value, creation of shared value on both ends of the spectrum. So having said that, I think what we can do is, especially if you're looking at medical options from a bottom-up perspective, yes, lower cost medicine, low cost technology, all of that is important, but much more than all of that is about influencing behavior, is about advocacy, is about bringing to people who do not understand what it means to wash hands, the importance of washing hands and how that can, a small thing like that, behavioral change can bring down morbidity, especially in the maternal and infant mortality scenario. So I think at the end of the day, when we look at things like low-cost interventions, transfer of technology, generic drugs going abroad and coming back to us, I mean, these are things I think we need to address at a far broader macro level, where if you really want the leveraging of these options to benefit the people to whom it belongs in the first place, it's time for us to indigenize, it's time for us to build skills within the country, because we are very smart people. We go out and do great things everywhere else. So why not build those skills right here? So build those skills, bring in those low-cost manufacture within India, whether it's drugs, whether it's equipment. And I think once we start doing that, and advocacy from a bottom-up perspective, CSR doesn't only have to be taking mobile vans. CSR doesn't only have to be tying up with hospitals. CSR also can be about advocacy in terms of behavior, in terms of how small life skills changes can make a difference to the way a family is healthy. And especially microfinance, now 99% of our clients are women. Women go a long way in influencing behavior at home in terms of hygiene, in terms of what you eat. So if, sectors like this, if you can address, and there are sectors that are dealing with people who need this kind of intervention the most, I think we would go a long way in being able to deliver low-cost solutions with minimal interventions to take forward this whole dialogue about better health for people in India. Thank you.
Thank you, Ratna. Sure. Am I audible? Yeah. Thank you, Ratna. You've touched upon a very important aspect of this whole definition of India as the pharmacy of the world. We do make drugs for the rest of the world, but sometimes can't get those drugs and solutions to our own people, to those who need them most because of logistical and financial challenges. And of course, we need to find an answer to that. I move now to the second speaker, Nirupama Soundarajan, who's from the Pele India Foundation. Her work has essentially been on financial sector reforms, both in India and internationally. What do we need to do to make finance more easily available to enhance access? So, Nirupama, if I could invite you to go up and speak.
Thank you, Ashok. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me begin with two ironies that are evident in India today. One, we are probably the largest destination for medical tourism, and yet domestically we continue to grapple with issues around affordability, around access, and around accountability. Two, the two most crippling expenses that any household, and mind you, this is irrespective of income levels, whether they're urban and rural, the two most crippling expenses that any household faces is ironically, again, education and health. They are probably the most expensive services that any household incurs at any point. The effect of such a high expense is probably a lot more evident with the low-income groups. There is data that suggests that medical expenses alone has pushed up to around probably 60 million people back into poverty, which is actually very, very pitiful, because not only are we making it so expensive already, but the cost of incurring these expenses is actually go back into poverty. If we look at the 3 A's, as I like to call them, as affordability, accountability, and access, I'd like to focus more on the affordability aspect. So when we talk about being able to afford healthcare, there are broadly 2 or 3 ways to look at it. So we've already heard the previous panel talk about how it is the government's responsibility in order to provide basic healthcare, and we have already also touched upon, Ron mentioned, we don't know if the exchequer actually has that much money in order to be able to provide the finances. Given the fact that if we are solely dependent only on the government to provide finances, then we are also left at the mercy of the larger economy at play, fiscal deficit, etc., and therefore, while it is certainly the responsibility of both the center and the state, we have to look at other options. Ratna already touched upon the CSR aspect, which I think is a very, very important tool that we have available. And notwithstanding in which areas the money goes into, I think health will obviously be one of the biggest attractions, and it ranges from something as simple as building toilets and creating a hygienic living environment to the more, let's call it complicated programs, if you will. But I would like to focus on the other aspect, which is actually creating a different type of access. Now, apart from making drugs cheaper or medical services cheaper, we also need to enable an individual to afford his or her medical expenses, which means utilizing your existing financial institutions, creating certain kinds of products, credit products available, which will mean creating an access in order to fund their medical expenses. For example, in India, we don't even have a concept, and I don't think there is really across the globe, not that I have read of a medical loan or a medical emergency loan. In India, typically when one has a medical emergency, it's either breaking an FD, or if you look at the lower income groups, one usually goes and pledges gold because it's the easiest, it's the fastest, and it's also secure lending from a financial institution point of view, and you have the money with no hassles. When we look at a certain income group, the lower income group, we need to understand that you are dealing with your usual suspect issues when it comes to the financial sector, which is lack of maybe a robust KYC. You do have credit worthiness, which is an issue. You will also have issues such as NPAs. But notwithstanding all of that, we do have examples of product bundling and innovative solutions which have worked for other products. For example, look how easy it has become in order for an individual to buy a car or a two-wheeler. You go to a showroom, you're given an insurance, and you're offered a facility of loan in order to make processes easy. That's bundling. So can that be done similarly at the hospitals? When you go there, can be bundled products. Look at how buying consumer durables has become easy. You have 0% interest EMIs that get done. I know a lot of people, we're doing another study on the socio-economic impact of mobile phones and smartphones, penetration. How is it that they're able to buy these smartphones? It's a planned purchase, but EMIs has certainly helped. Similarly with TVs. They are able to purchase because there is a 0% product that's available as credit, and they are able to get it. Similarly, if we look at also your regulatory structure, under your priority sector lending, a very unique aspect as far as India is concerned, where the RBI specifies a certain amount of sectors to which if you lend, it's construed as priority. They're considered as priority sector, and banks are mandated to lend a certain portion of the credit to these sectors. Typically, these sectors are chosen keeping in mind the priorities for the nation, and usually to those sectors where credit is not easily available. Education loans is one of it. Recently, loans to the renewable industry also became part of it. Waste management has entered the field, but nowhere do we have even medicine featuring. But I think that's also because we don't have a concept, as I go back to saying, of a medical loan. Loan in terms of emergencies, you do a personal loan, you do a gold loan, but what in terms of a medical loan? We also need to keep in mind that when we talk of financial products, especially with something like a medical loan, time is of the essence. You can't afford to say that, look, you apply, we wait for 10 days, and then we'll get back to you whether you have it or not. So secure lending to some extent works. You may not actually give them the entire 100% against the collateral, because most of them will have something to pledge, but at least anything to bridge that time for that immediate purpose. I think product innovation there is absolutely necessary. We also need to capitalize on the kind of networks that we have as far as our financial institutions are concerned. Microfinance networks are brilliant because they actually have that last mile connectivity. And as Ratna rightly pointed out, they work with women largely, and they do go a long way in actually taking forward the cause of health within the family. They do influence. The other system that I would want to talk about is the post office. More and more we're seeing how effective the post office is in terms of delivering services. And in India, nobody has the reach of a post office or the postman. They actually go to the last mile. And everybody has an implicit trust in the post office. Can we look at maybe using those networks better in order to bring the access and also to some extent bring connectivity? You're looking at differentiated banking models which are going to thrive on actually surviving in your remote area. So it is necessary to bring the connect back. Lastly, when we're talking, what I would like to finish off with is whether we talk about the Make in India initiative or whether we're talking about the Digital India campaign, the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, or even financial inclusion. More often than not, what we forget to do, where it's not obvious, is to bring the connect back to your basic social requirements, education, health. So everything has to go back and connect to these fundamental issues. If you're talking financial inclusion, you need to go and explain to the person why he should be financially included. Why is credit important? Work is one aspect, but an area that he may probably relate to more is to say that you may be able to afford healthcare better because you will have credit available. You may be able to provide education because you will have credit available. But that missing link has to come through. So apart from actually creating awareness about medicines, healthcare, etc., every single campaign that we talk about at some point should go back and make it a point to connect it to the larger interest, which is actually education and health. They are the fundamentals, and we should make sure we never forget that. Thank you.
Thank you, Nilpama. Our final speaker, because Dr. Solomon had to drop out, as I said, so we are left with only three, is Dr. Ratin Roy, who's from the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. He's going to address issues of how the government can best use public resources to address healthcare challenges, how it can crowd in private finance and use private finance, private expertise, private networks to complement what the public networks do. Is there a role here for development banks, for multinational development banks perhaps? What about innovative mechanisms such as using CSR, as Ratna addressed, and using large employers such as India's oil companies, India's railways, India's military as well? Ratin, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashok, and thank you, Arif. And I'd like to especially thank Ashok for bringing me out of the second interaction I'm doing on the issue of health. We do have a health finance unit at NIPFP, but I stay well out of what I do. It's my privilege as director to stay out of anything substantive. But this has forced me to sort of engage with this. And what I'm going to do, I think, will be most helpful. I don't know much about, I don't have any deep knowledge of this sector. I know what I read in the newspapers, and much of that, as we know, is flawed. But what I do know, in conversations with the central and state governments about their overall fiscal reform processes, is, my sense of what the implicit problem is in dealing with this frustration people have, which is, to be summarized, why does India spend less as a percentage of GDP on public health, actually on health, but on public health, and what it spends so badly that there are no outcomes. First, let me start by saying something provocative. I'm becoming popular for this, which is that as things are today, if nothing changes, for governments to put money into health is an extremely bad business case. Because from where I'm sitting, money is fungible. There's a government that has to win an election. It can win that election through providing many things that are demanded by the populace, one of which is healthcare, and so ministers are going to make a choice. And when one evaluates that choice, this is an extremely bad business case for several reasons. The most obvious one, I don't know why this is not realized, is the outcomes of providing healthcare or better health for all, except in very specific interventions which have to do with epidemiology, are not bankable. If you educate somebody and they get a job, that's bankable. If you keep someone healthy, that enables them to get and keep a job, but that is not perceived in the voter's mind as being automatically bankable. So there is some distance there between your investment and your outcome. It's a desirable social investment, but its sort of voter pull tends to be limited. That can be changed. I'm just saying that is how it starts. The second is a technical problem, which is it's fairly easy for us to provide capital expenditure for healthcare. But it's the business of providing healthcare, that is the business of buying and acquiring medicines, running hospitals, providing the human resources, is a matter of current expenditure. I need these resources to come every year. And in public finance and in terms of our FRBM, which we've all signed up to, we are committed not to borrow for expenditure that recurs every year. We can borrow for expenditure that is investment, but not for expenditure that is termed consumption. You can argue that these bring permanent benefits, but if you like, we'll take that in the discussion. From a fiscal point of view, that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't wash. And I'll explain why, if you like, in the discussion. So basically, I have to find resources to pay salaries of doctors every year, And in my overall macro fiscal envelope, I can only do that if I collect enough taxes to pay their salaries and other consumption requirements. For the past 35 years, the government, even more, 35 now, years, the government of India has not been doing that. This present administration plans at the central government level to borrow to consume through to 2019. And therefore, the ability to expand working capital resources to a business audience, recurrent resources in healthcare from the public budget, given this fiscal discipline constraint, is extremely limited. Same problem goes for education. But I have to put this on the table. Okay. The third problem is everyone knows that the system is broken, and everyone knows there's a sociology to why the system is broken. I'm talking about the public service delivery system in India. But within government, one has to, otherwise one goes insane, maintain the fiction that things are working. So when you start NRHM, the file process, the business process, proceeds as if things will work. Despite everyone in the system knowing that it will not work, it has not worked for a long time, unless you have urgent, immediate administrative reforms. So given this dysfunctional business process of governance in India, governance specifically in the context of the delivery of public services, there is ab initio low optimism with respect to the ability of government to provide healthcare. There's a lot of cynicism. Let me put it this way, I don't know how many public servants are in this room, but public servants in this country, the first thing you notice when you come back, talk disparagingly about the system, but psychologically insulate themselves from it. The system is bad. I say you're part of the system, you say, yeah, I may be part of it. So there's a lot of disempowerment across the board. I wish Amitabh was here. He would disagree with me. But there is a lot of disempowerment, and therefore there is a lot of, how do I put it, there's a lot of fiction built up about things working. You cannot go to a minister and say that in Dhule district, where I come from in Maharashtra, I know that the RMO is corrupt, and I know that that minister is interested in diverting money to a contractor, and therefore I cannot provide an allocation to Dhule district, even if I knew that. I can't write that on file. And everyone knows that. And now this poison has spread to such an extent that we sort of do what I call zombie policy making. That afflicts not, it does afflict, but it afflicts not areas where the outcome failures are tangible and which are media friendly on a continuous basis. So if you're doing a power sector reform, they're watching you every day. If you're doing a health sector reform, an education sector reform, you have a bunch of pressure groups, but the media only picks up these stories from time to time. So the level at which public accountability can intervene to improve this process, in my view, is very limited. That's the third problem. Part of this problem of sociology is that in this country, in terms of delivery of public services, we have a ubiquitous HR crisis. It's not pay. I've just been on a pay commission. Public health workers in India and teachers are paid approximately 200% more than their equivalents in the private sector. And I'm just looking at their current income, not their pensions and perks, etc. 200% more. That's not the point. The point is that the people we are hiring, by and large, are not fit for purpose for what they are being hired for. And we haven't yet figured out a way to alter that. One dimension of that problem, which I've been highlighting, I've written about this, is that when we hire anybody in the public service in India, for sociological and political economy reasons, everyone has to be hired as if they are part of the civil service. And the civil service in India is the most socialist thing in the world. I've never seen such a more egalitarian, such a wonderfully socialist civil service. You need exactly the same qualification to become an IAS officer as you educationally, as you do to become a sub-inspector of police. And there are profound sociological reasons why that is not a stupid idea. There's a very good reason for that, but we won't go there. So as a result, what you have, other than specific things like doctor, where there's an hierarchy of things you could do, one of which, if you don't want to be at the top of your medical profession, would be to join the IAS. And we have plenty of doctors in the IAS, no shortage. Or to join a pharmaceutical company. And somewhere down the line, you might want to join a public health service. So but even there's not such a problem. The problem is that when you are left with that set, there aren't enough people to hire to deliver healthcare. And I can give you no more profound example of this than 2 years ago, the state of Uttar Pradesh, the biggest state in India, when it was recruiting people at the district level to provide primary healthcare, were recruited, I think 40% of the recruitment was dentists. And that can be quite serious as a problem. So we have an HR problem too. So these are the 4 reasons why, if things come on healthcare to a Ministry of Finance, they are pretty daunting. Now, very often you have political leaders who are able to overcome these challenges because there are specific constituencies that they are aware of that demand a solution to these challenges, or things assume crisis proportions. And then you do see successes, but those happen at the state level mainly. So I'll come to the state level at the end. Let me then proceed to saying, okay, so what are the initial steps one can take to address this problem? On the fiscal side, what we do not have in this country, and I'm so glad that, Soumya, you mentioned it, we know what the poverty line is. The poverty line has absolutely nothing to do with healthcare or education. This question I used to ask, I used to work for the UN for many years, and sometimes you get tired of these sort of smug rooms where people are talking about the poor in Zambia. So a good question I used to ask there is, how many of you in the UN system send your children to a public school or a public hospital? The answer is normally 0. Normally. I've never been to the UN in Denmark, but including in New York, it is extremely rare in headquarters that a UN public servant sends their children to public school. By that, I don't mean to sort of say that there's some hypocrisy there. What I'm trying to point out is that we don't have an estimate of what it would take for an average family, even in the city of Delhi, or don't we? I'll tell you in a minute, to buy things from the market at existing market prices without worrying about secondary supply-demand effects. We simply don't know. We know what poverty is, and then we have some notion of what inequality is. We have no notion of what is called basic income. And then we have a hodgepodge, because then I have no benchmark to measure whether it is better to provide a basic income as long as there's supply response, or to let people in the public sector provide things cheaper than it would be to provide a basic income. I simply don't know. Nada. No information. We have started doing this work for the city of Delhi, and I hope to have results in a year. But of course, this being India, I'm terrified because Indians are very good statisticians. The first thing I'm trying to come up with a benchmark, is 40 reasons why. Yesterday I got one saying, you're not calculated the imputed labor of women who work in the house. That should be part of basic income. But excuse me, that's not the reason I'm asking this question. But so I'll have to bear this cross. That's why these things take time in India. So the first thing I think we need to do is come up, in response to what you're saying, with a basic income concept, to buy healthcare, to buy sanitation, provided the supply were available at current supply. What would be the cost? The cost would be pretty high. I have some means of knowing what the cost would be from my time in the pay commission. In the pay commission that we have recommended, the lowest paid government employee will be paid 21,000 rupees a month, plus perks. So 40. Difficult to imagine anyone getting less than 35 or 40 by the time they come into service. That is calculated how? That is calculated on the basis of first what you got historically, and then applying something that the public sector unions use called the Ackroyd formula. There was a Mr. Ackroyd, apparently, I just never knew this, colonial times, British gentleman, who came up in some labor commission the British put up with a formula of what a sort of respectable person, as opposed to a poor person, would need, right, on a monthly basis. And that respectable person was defined as the lowest permanent government employee. So I said, wow. So now I have something. The Ackroyd formula takes into account other stuff. It will be lower. It takes into account the fact that if I'm respectable, I have to spend some money on marriage. So part of that is part of the Ackroyd formula also. But it also includes this. You benchmark schooling, you benchmark education, you benchmark healthcare. So the good news is the baseline work is there in the Ackroyd formula, which is an average, but the work is done by the Labour Bureau across something like 70, 80 locations in India. Largely urban, but that's okay, then it's an overestimate. So I think the first step we need to take, and this is a big research program, and I invite those who are interested to join us in this, we desperately need partners, to work on just a concept of basic income for India. The second problem is HR crisis, and I'll be provocative here. I don't see this resolving given our current sociology and given the current ambitions of our doctors, which is either to go abroad or, if possible, to work in urban areas, otherwise become IAS officers. So in these circumstances, without any sociological transformation in the head, and if that happens, that's fine, great, I'm taking it as a parameter, do we need to think about importing labor for health? Should we be thinking about that in the public sector? Because we are not at all satisfied that the quality of private sector healthcare that is given at affordable cost today uses human resources that are especially better I'm not saying they're worse, but especially better than the public sector? This is a terrible question to ask in India, but I'm asking it anyway. Maybe there are countries in the neighborhood where we could get in people. I'm thinking of Manila, the Philippines. And of course, then we'll have to confront questions, not that we'll export, we'll have to confront questions as to why the private sector nursing model, for instance, financially, is like this. If you interview a nurse, which I did, I work as a nurse for 5 years in the private sector, earning a small amount of money. I then use that expertise to go to the Gulf, and I make my money and come back. So I'm willing to take a haircut there. Whereas in the public sector, I don't do that because I enter a lifetime contract. It's the nature of the public sector. Your pension, etc., kicks in after some time. So the best, obviously, the private sector don't stay long enough, and they leave. And this is happening with many kinds of healthcare workers in the private sector. So perhaps we need to look at a more globalized model of importing and exporting critical human resources in healthcare. It's not a great solution. I really don't see what else I can do. On the capex, I think there is hope because you see, a very interesting thing has happened in state finances in India. The states today do not borrow to consume as a collective. 3 states do, Punjab, Kerala, and Haryana, and West Bengal. 2 states are doing so temporarily now, Maharashtra and Haryana, and maybe Tamil Nadu this year. But by and large, over the next 15 years, I would expect most states in India not to borrow to consume and in fact to earn a surplus over their taxation. So if there is money to hire people or to spend money on incremental healthcare on the working capital side, it is already with the states, and the states are the focal agencies by a constitution for investing in healthcare. But we don't have enough conversations with the states, and we don't have enough conversations with multiple states. So the only people having a conversation with multiple states are the government of India. PHFI to some extent. But we don't actually say that, okay, Bihar has 5% extra GSTP, and maybe they can only absorb 2.5% today in healthcare. Can they actually then combine on something that is cross-border with Madhya Pradesh or one of its neighbors to come up with neighboring products? We're doing this in the power sector. I'm personally involved in doing this in the power sector. But we don't do it in health and education because these are ring-fenced. So that would be one easy solution. The capex problem then can be the headache of the public, of the center, which could then leverage in PPPs and other things. And the working capital problem could be something that the states could address. There are 2 things I think we cannot do. I'll tell you what those are and then I'll conclude. I think it's a terrible, terrible idea, and I was telling the minister this yesterday, but he changed the subject, to levy cesses. It's the most horrible thing you can do in a country, and in our country in particular for 2 reasons. Cesses are not shareable with the state governments unlike other taxes. So you piss off the state governments when you levy a Swachh Bharat cess. It's like you're increasing the tax rate. Constitutionally, you're required to share it with the states, but you don't want to, so you call it a cess. Second, any public finance economist worth their salt knows that cesses are optical, except under some very odd conditions, where the total amount of the cess exceeds all your other taxes. So in other words, if I increase my existing taxes by X as government of India and spend that extra X on Swachh Bharat, what would have happened? So what the cess does in a broken system like ours is it tells the people of India who are very suspicious about how our taxes are used that don't worry, I'm using it for Swachh Bharat. I'm using it for education. So optically it's very useful, but actually it's useless. What you're arguing for in effect when you argue for a cess, unless you're a PR man, and I have to be sometimes, is raise taxes. And let's not beat around the bush. I mean, it's a convenient way of not getting people's hackles up. So what you're saying there is that we tax too little, and we can't collect more taxes with our current tax rates and pay for a healthcare system. So let us raise taxes to raise additional money. But that will not get around the FRBM problem in our country also. The second problem here is this priority sector lending. It's now become a joke. I cannot think of anything that is not potentially priority sector lending almost, unless I'm investing in a spa or something like that. I'm part of a climate finance conversation with FICCI, and there's this huge pressure to declare investments in the environment or in climate change mitigation as priority sector lending. As you rightly said, we have that for education as well. We have that for other things as well. Now, what you're doing here is you're breaking up the Indian financial system. You're saying that I'm going to sort of pre-allocate something like 25% of domestic savings to 19 things without going to Parliament, without going to the people of India and saying, are these your priorities? This is done entirely by executive fiat. So I think this priority sector thing is wrong. It's a hangover from a broken socialist model, which has come into a sort of broken, trying to find its way model. And the sooner we do away with it, the better. But of course, at the margin, as long as it is there, people tell me we should use it for good things. But that's a terrible, terrible thing to do, to use things for good things at the margin. It's like saying that I'm an alcoholic, so I'll keep brandy at home just in case someone falls ill and faints. But the house is full of alcoholics. So we can't do that anymore with our savings. They're far too fractured to make that a credible solution. So in the end, to conclude, we have only two options. If you want to increase money going to social services, none of these will work until you improve the quality of delivery per rupee. And that's a much larger question for the reasons I've outlined to you. So the business case is bad. But if you insist on putting more money into a business case that is bad, knowing fully well that you will not get the outcomes you want, then there are two ways to do it. One is to increase the taxable capacity of the state so they can invest in revenue expenditure, and combine with the multilateral institutions who will be very happy to give you money for health because they don't like giving you money for infrastructure, because infrastructure means accountability and health doesn't. So you'll get easy money there from the World Bank. And they're much happier, the task managers, doing a healthcare loan than doing an infrastructure loan, because infrastructure loans are long, they involve regulatory risk, it's work for the task manager. Healthcare loan, there's nobody accountable. I gave the loan, IMR didn't go down, well, it's the government's fault. So you'll get money there. Otherwise, I think what we need are a fresh set of ideas about two things, and that's my final conclusion. Is the public health care delivery system, and therefore a publicly financed, whether purchased or provided, a publicly financed healthcare delivery system going to be the way forward for this federation, given the facts I've just outlined to you? And if they're going to be a priority, then what is the level of incremental taxation that we will need to so fund this? A simple back of the envelope calculation, and Samir, I thank you for this because you did the same thing for me with education. We'll tell you that from the public first, public healthcare financing is not affordable at our current levels of per capita income unless you want to return me my entire defense budget. You dissolve my army, you get rid of the Maoist problem, you'll have ample money for healthcare. But if you take those as parametric, there is no money for either healthcare or education coming from the public budget incrementally because those levels of taxation will not be sustainable. Therefore, then the alternative becomes, as I think both of you have been saying, not just the alternative, it becomes a need to look at the private sector and ask what they can deliver, but that's a supply side question. On the demand side, we have to ask this elephant in the room question, what is the basic income an Indian citizen needs? And that's where public financing can come in, to be able to afford to buy things from the market at current levels of efficiency. They will go down as efficiency goes up, but we need that number. And that benchmark will tell us where and to what extent the public exchequer can step in to fill that financing gap. So that would be the second model, privately provided healthcare with the maximum amount of public financing provided to it at the margin through the public exchequer. I don't think there's any third solution. There are solutions I'd love to hear, but they're not interesting. They are sort of good food like is good for you solutions, which is let's improve the quality of our public service delivery. That's always true, do it. And then your costs will go down. There's no point constantly debating that. So what I'm saying, therefore, is given that I'm not expecting, and that's my job as a finance guy, these things to change, these are the only two financing models available for us. There's considerable opportunity there to do things at the margin, but the transformational aspect of this is necessarily going to be limited because our systems are broken and ineffective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ratin, for a very illuminating and no-holds-barred, clear-headed, as usual, talk. We now move to the last part of this panel, which is the Q&A. If anyone here has questions, points to make, comments, please just raise your hand and grab a mic. I think there are mics going around. If you want to address a specific panelist, please go ahead. Occasionally, I'll use my prerogative as a moderator and come in with some questions. Any questions?
I'm
Sorry,
Rakesh Bhatnagar from JNU. I think the lady, what is her name?
Nirupama and Ratna.
Nirupama, yeah. She pointed out about the loan for healthcare. I think you don't buy an umbrella when it starts raining, correct? So health insurance, I think affordable health insurance is the answer. And I think many countries have done it. And that is what we should work on rather than going for loans and EMIs. After all, that will attract interest, that will be too expensive. And again, your problem of collateral, etc., will come. And the other thing which I think my question is to
Ratin Roy?
Sunil, no. I think this public finance person.
Ratin Roy.
Okay, Robin. Okay.
I recognize that.
I think no matter what you say, I think the most important thing has to be investment in the education, because we have seen in Kerala, for example, when they invested in education and the whole state became literate, I think their healthcare became better, their everything became better. So I think we cannot neglect particularly the primary and secondary education, and that too of good quality. And perhaps it is possible it has to be compulsory. Unless we do that, I don't think we are going to solve any problem which come later on. Let it be health, let it be defense, let it be hygiene, let it be health. You cannot do unless you invest in primary and secondary education. Thank you.
We could take one more question and then get some responses.
Well, you see, there are some basic issues like, of course, one point is the cost of proactive public health care programs vis-a-vis the cost of not providing it. You see, if the health care is not effective, well, we can talk of governance and ethics and all those aspects are involved, but nonetheless, the fact remains that if proactive healthcare system doesn't exist, there's a phenomenal cost to the nation and to the society. Have we done any work on the cost analysis, cost-benefit analysis of providing through public system or not providing? That's one. And of course, there can be different mechanisms, there can be different methods as to how. I think one very good system is Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. When we talk of education, is the woman in the house who really educates your next generation as to what should be the standard of hygiene and the food. So that is one fundamental thing. Okay, education, yes, but besides that, the importance to be given to the woman in the house. All right, now the question is that whether we have systems in the private sector through microfinance or through insurance systems and so on and so forth, or through the publicly administered system by the governments. Now that is a very debatable issue, and I think possibly in a system like ours, what we require is an optimal compromise between the two, because neither can fully meet the requirements. There are certain very expensive facilities like the clinics and the hospitals and the specialty, super specialty hospitals, which on one hand, if you allow totally in the private sector, well, it may become unaffordable for the, what you call the bottom of the pyramid. How we make our systems more efficient, yes, that's a big challenge. How do we make it more ethical? That system will remain. So I think it's a very, very big canvas, it's a very big spectrum. And
there was a question from that, I saw a hand, yes, sir. After which we'll go to responses from all three panelists.
I am Devendra Kaul, retired Deputy General Manager, Renewable Energy, NTPC. Unlike US, emergency medical care is not good in India. I will just point out, while I was in US this year, I was hit by a car. And I was surprised, within 5 minutes, ambulance came to the site along with the police. And I was taken to the emergency care hospital, where no money was asked for me for getting admission into the hospital. CT scan was done, stitches were done, but still they didn't charge anything all treatments was done. And I'm surprised that kind of treatment is lacking in India. Can we have that sort of a treatment in India also? That is really, I must say, I was very much impressed by emergency medical care in US. We are totally lacking here in India.
I guess in theory the systems exist. You can go to AIMS or something, but in practice we all know how it works.
Can I ask a quick question to Ratin?
Yes.
So you were talking about the private sector and private mobilization of some instruments for healthcare. Do you think once you start mapping the informal, the cash economy digitally, say through cashless transactions, through fintech companies, and you are able to map the cash flows of the farmers who normally are unbanked or who are outside the banking system, and you create a digital balance sheet for them. Can you then, based on that, create some innovative products, insurance products, that can allow them certain forms of bottom of the pyramid insurances and treatments? Is that a viable model in the digital India paradigm and what's happening in the last few years?
So in a sense, can Jan Dhan become Jan Swasth? Let's get responses to the whole gamut of issues have come up. So starting with Nirupama, then Ratna, and then Ratin.
Thank you. Gentleman out there who's talking about education and loan and insurance. You see, I think I've always held this view that in India, anything that we talk about always becomes an either-or situation. Does it have to be education or does it have to be health? Should it be primary education? Should it be higher education? Should it be this or should it be that? It's never just one. We have to look at all of it. We can't isolate. So is insurance important? Of course it's important. But is also making money available important? Yes, because in India, and I beg to differ from you, we actually do buy umbrellas when it's raining. We don't do it otherwise. We never do. It is a problem, whether it's insurance, whether it is always necessity driven. We don't plan. If we were a country that planned, trust me, we'd have a more vibrant pension system. We don't. We don't plan for our retirement. We don't plan for exigencies.
We'd have better roads.
Call it what you may, but that is the truth. That is where we are. And I think also in terms of what the gentleman was talking about in terms of bundling with insurance products, coming back to that, there are cases where insurance products are being offered as part of bundle, whether it's an accident cover, whether it's life insurance that's being offered, or whether it's health insurance, especially in case of farmers and farmer cooperatives, because we did do this survey in my earlier organization, and we did find that there are certain types of delivery mechanisms that exist so that there is a curious bundling of products that happen. But the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, I don't think any of those solutions are ever really scalable. And in India, the problem that we always have is in terms of scalability. You have isolated instances. State governments run very, very successful public-driven health systems. I know Tamil Nadu has it, I know Gujarat has done it, but though all of them are restricted only to one area. Scalability is something that we will always have to reckon with. And unless we are able to solve that issue, and I'm going to have to actually agree with Ratin when he says that we don't have many options as far as going to the public delivery system. I think the debate for us really is to look at, to see whether the way forward for healthcare, universal healthcare in India, has to be something that's provided by your exchequer. Because even I don't think it's a very good idea. I don't think we can afford it. And I think more often than not, it will come at the cost of something else. Because it always does. And who's to decide and at what point what is worth more than the other? I think this is the debate that one really needs to have. Thank you.
Fair enough. Ratna?
I think the essence of the problem lies in the fact that states can decide on their own as to the health delivery systems. The center has a different dispensation. I don't think they even talk to each other, whereas most of the governing clauses, the policies, the issues around healthcare regulation, etc., is done at the central level. And the state government may or may not decide to apply it. So when this itself, there is a dichotomy in the system where the central government and the state governments are not talking to each other, irrespective of what products you have out there, whatever you have out there, this basic dialogue has to happen in the first place. And like she said, you can't have a national health delivery system like you have in the UK, because we are not generically programmed to build a system like that. We didn't start that way. So to go back to the drawing board and do something like that would probably be far more detrimental than trying to fix what we already have today, which is very badly broken. Secondly, I think there is no standardization. There is absolutely no standardization in terms of the cost of delivery of medicine in the private sector, and people charge whatever they want, and there is no regulatory authority there that says, and it's a very, very complex dialogue. It's not like today I will regulate and tomorrow you will agree, because there are so many nuances to that in terms of who is driving what pressure. So it's not a simple, straightforward dialogue that today I decide to regulate and everybody will fall into the regulatory space. No. So I think there is standardization, there's a need for dialogue between the various agencies involved at the state and central government level. You have good models in the state. We're talking about scalability. What about looking at what they're doing? Why is it so difficult to carry practices which are working somewhere to other places? We don't, because the option is left for us to choose. So,
yeah, well, I not, let me just sort of agree with everything that was said about what we could do better. I also agree with you completely about the fact that education is necessary. But I don't think it's going to be politically viable for state governments to shut down providing healthcare and divert that money to education. As a finance guy, I'm looking at what you're saying, that being the implication, that first provide education, then provide healthcare. May well be true. It's not going to be operationally or politically viable because, you know, the government will lose the election. So, and just one point in that context, you know, India is a bit like the United Nations system which I worked in, which is a really crappy system to work in because they don't achieve anything except, if you look at, I did this just before I left, the three major achievements of the UN in the development space in the last 25 years were significant progress on HIV, dealing with natural disasters, and conflict management in terms of the delivery of basic services in the R&R stage. All these three things are also things that IAS officers are very good at. Kumbh Mela, the massive thing, I don't know how many people come for a Kumbh Mela, toilets and all that. It is incredibly well managed by the same bureaucracy that fails in doing almost anything else, elections. So what's the common thing between these two? In both these two, the problem is very well defined. There is a beginning point and an end point, and then there is closure. In the business of providing quality education, or quality healthcare, or quality roads, or quality bus services, you have to do it every day. The movie is never going to end. And we are not very good at doing movies that never end, although our movies are very long. But, you know, we need our movies to end. So we are good at Kumbh Mela. It's a very important administrative insight. I urge you to reflect on it. So this is what we are good at. So in the context of healthcare, therefore, we will probably, and we have done not so badly on HIV. We can do much better, but not so badly. We can do very, very well in terms of programs that have an endpoint. So if it is something like the context of this, which is hepatitis C, I can actually come up with an algorithm which says that this is the beginning of my program, and this is where public resource interventions will go down, and these are the successes we will have. And we have done it with polio, we have done it with malaria. So in this public health epidemiology space, I think what I have been saying does not apply, and therefore there is a much stronger business case there than in other places. So I wanted to make that exception. Sami, to respond to you, yeah, in fact, the other thing that is happening here is your favorite Suez Canal type thing, which I've just been part of. I just gave 2,500 rupees this morning. Crowdsourcing for people's livers and things. That has already started happening. Problem there is we don't have information about exclusion. So, and we don't know, so if you look at a 15-year cycle where people access digital financing instruments, crowdsourcing, etc., we have to be very careful that these don't create asymmetries, which then create political pressures on governments to respond with putting useless public money into trying to resolve these asymmetries in this artificial way, which then wastes more money. So with that caveat, I would be willing to be educated by you. Again, let me plug this. I think we need an estimate of basic income in India. Once we do that, we will have a benchmark to start anchoring all these questions. Yes.
Thank you very much. In conclusion, I'd just like to make one point about this. We sometimes make this assumption, valid, maybe lazy, maybe a combination of the two, that as income levels and education rises, healthcare awareness also rises. I once was part of a study that looked at increasing immunization demand in India, because as you know, about 65% of India's children are immunized, and how do you increase demand in the community? The decision to immunize a child is taken by the mother in most cases. We found that mothers or women who were very educated, who belonged to rooms like this, educated, working in good jobs, had the awareness and the skills to get their children immunized. And they obviously work not because they need the money necessarily, but because they're hardwired to work. They've been taught to work. I mean, it was always taken for granted that woman would work. Then you have the very poor. The woman who's very poor, who comes to our house to maybe clean utensils in the morning or whatever, who needs to work to supplement her husband's income. So that it's a matter of survival for them. She also saw a need, like the very educated woman, for immunization. She saw it not as important because she couldn't stay home and look after a sick child. She said, get my child immunized. He needs to go to school. He needs to do something else because I need to go and work on a day-to-day basis to earn money. I can't stay home to look after him. It was the women in between who were actually middle class in a sense, in the Indian context, or new middle class if you prefer, who had some education, but who didn't need to work to supplement the husband's income because the husband was earning enough to feed the family, and who therefore had time to stay at home to look after the children. These were the women who were actually not from the lowest echelons of society, who didn't feel the need for immunization. So it was a completely counterfactual finding that people who were not from the lowest echelons of society, people who had some education, were the ones who were most difficult to persuade for a healthcare solution that was available. So we do have these complexities which we grapple with all the time, and this panel has also so successfully and richly grappled with. Thank you very much, Nirupama, Ratna, and Rathin, for an enriching discussion. We move seamlessly and immediately into our final panel. Mr. Amitabh Kant, Secretary, Department of Industrial Promotion and Policy, is with us. May I invite him to join us, to join me rather, on the podium. Over the past 2 days, yesterday and this morning, if I could summarize our discussions, we've focused on 3 themes really. One, India's tectonic economic and social transformation, including in terms of health outcomes, and what role the US can play in helping, partnering, engaging India. Second, the entire issue of innovation, of technology access, and how this can merge with India's imperative for Make in India, for manufacturing in India, and manufacturing really for the world. And third, how increased Indo-US cooperation engagement can lead to not just greater commerce and a greater trade volume or greater economic engagement, but can also find innovative solutions for pressing problems, including social problems, in many developing countries, in countries of Asia, Africa, countries that look upon the US as a role model, but also look upon India as a role model. The man who strings together all of these diverse themes, the man who's driving Make in India really, the man who's driving the Indo-US economic partnership to some degree, is right here to my left, Mr. Amitabh Kant. The floor is yours, sir.
Thanks, Ashok. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a great pleasure to be here. I'm delighted to be a part of this, what do you call it, a workshop or a session or whatever, but I'm absolutely delighted to be here. A great pleasure. To my mind, the key challenge really is for India to grow rapidly, and grow rapidly at rates of 9 to 10% per annum. Year after year, for 3 decades or more, to be able to create jobs for a very, very young population. India is passing through a window of demographic transition, which rarely happens in history. 72% of our population is below the age of 30, and therefore we need to create jobs. And to my mind, India can grow at those rates rapidly for 3 decades or more if India becomes an extremely simple and easy place to do business. India has made itself a very complex, a very difficult, and a very complicated place to do business. Over the years, we've added rules, regulation, procedures, paperwork, acts, which have just retarded people from doing business in a very big way, and therefore we need to scrap them. We just need to scrap them wholesale in a very big way. We just need to do away with a whole lot of regulatory regime which will enable business to flourish, which will enable people to unleash their energy, which will enable entrepreneurs to grow and prosper. And I think India is well on the road to do this now. And actually, in the last 14 to 15 months, we've done that quite vigorously. We've done away with a number of things. Just to give you some examples of this, we've reduced a 22-page form in the MSME sector to just 1 page, which is Aadhaar linked. We've reduced the number of forms required for trading across borders from 11 to just 3, 7 and 3. We've done away with almost 60% of the items which are required for licensing in the defense sector. We've done a whole lot of things, and I think India has jumped up about 12 positions in the ease of doing business. But I'm extremely hopeful that in the next year, India will jump almost about 40 to 45 positions, because a number of things which we've done have not been recognized right now, because usage is critical in the World Bank analysis, and which is taking place. And I think you'll see India jumping up rapidly. But I think the big picture, big ticket things like bringing in the bankruptcy law, putting in commercial courts, bringing in National Company Law Tribunal, all those big institutional changes have now been undertaken, and they are being operationalized. So I think India will, making things easy for entry and exit, have started happening. In fact, we are working towards a position where people should be able to register their business in just 1 day. And I think what India is trying to do is use technology to leapfrog in many of these areas, and our attempt is really to make India extremely easy, extremely simple for people to do business in. But much of the action has shifted to the states, and therefore we've worked with the states. One of the key things that we've done is that we've did a huge work with the states, around 100 points. We asked the states to take action on them, and the states worked on it, and actually we ranked the states. We asked the World Bank to do a ranking of the states. And for the first time in India, there was a huge competitive spirits of the states which was unleashed, and states were ranked. And many states have taken this as a challenge. And I can tell you, while Gujarat came number 1 and Andhra came number 2, the mineral-rich states of Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh were number 3, number 4, overtaking Tamil Nadu and Maharashtra and Karnataka. And, this happened. Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh came 3rd and 4th because they made everything online for entrepreneurs to get their approvals, but they also brought in huge labor and land changes. And therefore, they've jumped up, and it's good that the mineral-rich states have done remarkable work. But for next year, I can assure you that Andhra is breathing down the neck of Gujarat, and if Gujarat doesn't improve, Andhra will overtake it. And secondly, for next year, we've put 340 points, and over about 120 points relate to MSME sector. And if there's such a huge competitive zeal and spirit among states, that every day I have at least 2 secretaries sitting in my office to virtually assist them, help them to improve their ease of doing business. There's such a huge competitive spirit being unleashed in India that actually states want to get ranked in the top 5. And next year you'll see states just excelling in ease of doing business. So I have a feeling that India is on the cusp of a very, very radical paradigm shift as far as ease of doing business. And I see that states are scrapping paperwork, rules, regulations in a very big way. So that's happening. And India will, to my mind, is on the right course, the right direction. Secondly, to my mind, we must understand that we are in a globalized world. In a globalized world, you have to be a part of the global supply chain, and you have a very, very integral part of that global supply chain, and therefore India has opened up its economy, and in the last 14 to 15 months, India has rapidly opened up every single sector. It's opened up defense, it's opened up construction, it's opened up medical devices, it's opened up railways to 100%, it's opened up construction. Every single sector we've opened up. In fact, just a fortnight back we've opened up, which was actually opened up by the Prime Minister himself and was ratified by the Cabinet actually yesterday. We've opened up the FDI regime in 15 sectors across the board. And we've made India one of the easiest places to bring in FDI. In fact, 97 to 98% of India's FDI will flow through the automatic route without your coming to the Foreign Investment Promotion Board. And therefore, to my mind, India is the most open economy in the world. It's far more open than what United States is. It's far more open than what the United Kingdom is. And I'm willing to take that as a challenge. And if there's anything more that India can open up other than multi-brand retail, which is a political issue here for some reasons, but other than that, we've opened up every single thing. Please tell us what more we can open up. We'll be very happy to act on this. So India has actually seen a huge upsurge in FDI inflows. India's FDI has actually grown by close to about 40% at a point of time when FDI across the world has fallen by about almost 20%. FDI across the world has fallen by 20%. India's FDI has grown by about 40%. And therefore, to my mind, India needs to constantly continue this process of further providing greater vigor and energy because you're a part of the global supply chain. India must make itself a more and more open economy in the world. The third point I want to make is that India is seeing a huge energy, vitality, and huge dynamism in terms of young people launching their own startup. I was quite surprised that the director IIT whom I met in Mumbai just 2 days back told me that last year out of the students who passed out, one out of four actually either joined a startup or started his own startup. So 25% of the IIT graduates from IIT Mumbai were in the world of startups, and India has created a huge, vibrant ecosystem of startups, and what we are pushing for is ecosystem where young people can get into the world of startups without any compliances whatsoever. And we are all working towards this policy where we can provide greater impetus to youngsters to move away from this world of being job seekers to job creators, and we are pushing for that in a very, very big way. And you will see a whole range of new initiatives when the Prime Minister launches his startup initiative quite shortly. So the big energy is coming from youngsters in India who have launched themselves in this world of startup. The fourth point I want to make is that India is becoming increasingly a center for research and development. If you look at around Hyderabad and Bangalore, in the last 3 to 4 years, we've seen about almost 1,300 multinational corporations relocating their bases from their head offices, and historically, R&D was always linked with the head office of multinational corporations. It's totally got divorced. In Hyderabad and Bangalore, we've seen 1,300 companies. You name the company, starting from Cisco, IBM, 3M, name it all. They're all doing their R&D in Bangalore and Hyderabad, and they've created close to about almost 200,000 jobs in India, just R&D. So the big push is R&D. And to my mind, we are looking at two basic things. One is that the world of startups has largely been technology driven. We want to take it into other areas of manufacturing, into agriculture, into social sector, and take it away from just a Tier 1 city into Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities and push this R&D growth from Hyderabad and Bangalore to other parts of India. And we are providing a huge, huge impetus and growth. So if you were to look at it in terms of these 4 or 5 areas which I've talked about, one is about really focusing on ease of doing business. Secondly is about becoming a very integral part of the global supply chain by opening up your FDI regime. Thirdly, pushing bigger energy, vitality and dynamism in your startup regime. Fourthly, push for R&D growth, innovation, design, and so on. And fifthly is the infrastructure sector. Actually, in the last 15 months, there's been a huge, huge impetus to infrastructure sector. And I've looked at figures across roads, across railways. The largest amount of public outlays have been provided to provide a huge impetus to funding for infrastructure. Actually, infrastructure-wise, India has been a very, very big driver of private-public partnership in the road sector. With the slowdown in the global economy, the PPP sector had come under strain, but India has pushed for many more projects through the EPC regime, through the hybrid model sector, and we are seeing a huge upsurge again in the roads and the railway sector. In fact, railways have just 2 days back awarded the biggest projects in the history of Indian Railways to the General Electric and to Alstom. And as the GE chairman Jeff Immelt said, they're the biggest projects GE has ever backed in its history in a century. So 40,000 crore worth of project which have been awarded to GE and Alstom just last week. And to my mind, what you're witnessing, this dynamism that you're witnessing in the railway sector, where the minister has delegated his own power to the member, and member in terms have delegated their power to the general managers, and who in turn have delegated their power to the divisional railway manager. And therefore, the decision-making process administratively has got a huge amount of vigor and energy. I will see, what I'm foreseeing is a similar kind of push forward in the world of defense. And while GE and Alstom will create the global manufacturing basis for diesel and electric locomotives in the state of Bihar, and you will see a much more greater push in the coming months in the defense sector. And in the defense sector, with this new offset policy which is coming up, which is the defense procurement policy, which will be unleashed shortly, a lot of cleaning up will be done, and I would foresee that in the years to come, in the Make in India area, defense will become one of the key drivers of India's growth. And that is one area where India and US have a very, very close, should, to my mind, build up a very strong relationship. The Indo-US partnership is not just an engagement at the government level. Its vitality stems from a very close relationship at the private partnership level. And I think if you were to look at the figures in terms of investments, I see a huge upswing upwards. US was... we have an investment of close to about 15 billion from US. The bilateral trade in goods and services is exceeding the milestone of about 100 billion during the last financial year. We've pushed ahead in a vast number of areas. I mean, I see just yesterday, and I tweeted about that today morning, Boeing has had a huge interaction with almost about 100 Indian suppliers in Hyderabad, all the top Indian suppliers. You look at Tatas, you look at Mahindras, you look at a young company like Dynamatic, all manufacturing for Boeing in India. You look at a whole range of the United Technologies A92 helicopter, for instance. Its entire cabin is made in Hyderabad. So we've seen a huge amount of working together of Indian companies with American companies in the area of defense, and there's a huge potential for further growth in several of these areas. But if there's one sector in the Indian economy that in many ways truly embodies and reflects the Make in India spirit, it is the Indian pharmaceutical sector. I'm raising this point because in the brief given to me it was said that I should speak a little bit on the pharmaceutical sector. It is, in fact, one of the fastest growing pharmaceutical industry of the world. We have a huge market size of more than US 13.62 billion. We rank third in terms of volume productivity. We have about 10% share of the global pharmaceutical market, almost 20% share of the global exports in generics. Now, this industry in India comprises about 270 large R&D based pharmaceutical companies in and around 5,000 smaller players. We employ more than about 500,000 people in the pharmaceutical industry here. And over the years, there has been a complete transformation of the pharmaceutical industry in India from being predominantly generic manufacturers to partnering major pharma MNCs in their drug discovery efforts. The recent instances of licensing arrangements, and Gilead is here, and I'd like to congratulate them for this, where Gilead, as a prominent innovator company, has licensed out their products to the Indian companies. It's an indication of the fact that our pharmaceutical industry is extremely competent, extremely competent, and has the requisite skill sets to be a very, very valuable partner in research and development of pharma products worldwide. So and I would really appreciate this model because I've been interacting with a whole range of American companies. Time and again, we've had this issue of, I've always been a great believer that you can't be a great manufacturing nation till you don't respect other people's intellectual property rights. I'm a great believer that India must develop its own IPRs and respect other people's IPRs. You can't be a great innovative nation till you don't develop that spirit. And a robust innovation ecosystem, has been a very, very strong subject of debate and discussion within this government. The government had constituted a task force to draft out a completely new intellectual property rights policy for India. We are determined that India must look itself as a nation of innovators, as a nation of great design in the next 3 decades or so. This task force has given its policy recommendations. We are on the verge of a completely new IPR policy, and let me assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that this will be one of the most progressive IPR policies in the world. And this will be a policy which will be extremely forward-looking, which will be progressive, which will take care of the concerns of all the stakeholders. And I would like to make this point that the government is responsible, my department in particular is responsible for the implementation of intellectual property laws that have a direct relations, very direct relevance to the research and development. And I have no hesitation to say that the Indian Patent Act 1970, which was amended after considerable deliberations in the parliament in 1999, again in 2002, again in 2005, is a law that greatly balances the concern of all stakeholders. In fact, I've interacted with all American companies across the board. I've interacted with technology companies, I've interacted with aerospace companies, I've interacted with pharma companies across the board. And I have not had issues of intellectual property rights being raised by very many companies, except by no other company except the pharma companies. And it's always amazed me, and I'll come to this issue because India has a fairly well-established, and I feel that our act actually appropriately balances the concerns of stakeholders. India has a very well-established legislative, administrative, and judicial framework to safeguard intellectual property rights, which meets its TRIPS commitments. We definitely utilize the flexibilities provided in the international regime to address our own developmental concern, because the American pharma companies must understand that no government which is an elected government will be able to survive in power in India if it is not able to provide medicine at the right price points to its own people. It just will not be able to survive. And it's important that we are able to provide medicine at the right price points to our people. I've been here as secretary for almost a year and a half, and in my tenure I've been a witness to continuous debates on the patent regime in India, only with respect to pharmaceutical sector. And I've often wondered the reasons why why the debate only confines itself to the pharmaceutical sphere. And in my curiosity, I've got the grants and cases of revocation duly examined, and to my surprise, and also possibly to yours, the figures indicate that revocation of patents are minuscule, are absolutely minuscule as compared to the grants. And that too, there has been far higher number of revocations in the field of mechanical engineering than in the pharmaceutical sector. Not only that, more than 77% of patents granted in India in the pharmaceutical sector are granted to foreign companies. And actually, the revocation has taken place only in just one case in India, and far less than what America has done. America exceeds this by a very vast number. And, you know, to my mind, one swallow does not make a summer, and we should not get carried away by one example of revocation to the extent that we start maligning the regime that has withstood the test of time and which finally balances the concerns of users and right holders. And I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that while we are fully here to protect the intellectual property rights of all American companies, especially in the pharmaceutical sector, the American companies also must realize that it's absolutely essential in a very vibrant democracy that elected government should be able to provide medicine. And I'm making this point again, at the right price points. If we are not able to supply that, this government will not survive in power. And therefore, we have to appropriately, it doesn't matter to us at what price point you sell to people, to Mr. Mukesh Ambani, to Mr. Anil Ambani, to Mr. Kumar Mangalam Birla, to people living above the poverty line. But people living below the poverty line, medicine must be provided at the right price point. For any person, medicine is synonymous with life. Pharmaceutical industry is responsible for allowing individuals to lead a healthy and productive life, and considering the very critical role that pharmaceutical products play, integrity in the context of such an industry has a completely different connotation. It is important that companies follow good management and clinical practices by ensuring complete compliance with quality regulation. We believe that we need to improve our push for innovation, our push for greater design, our push for greater level of research and development in all these areas. In all these areas, the new intellectual property right policy, which will come up shortly, it is going to be placed before it has gone in for intergovernmental discussions, but it will come up for discussion before the cabinet. It will unleash the innovation potential of India. And I think, to my mind, with that, India and US need to develop a strategy, including improving, working together with companies to provide a greater level of thrust. And to my mind, we are just at the beginning of a very vibrant, very hugely potential relationship, a very potent relationship. I think we're just at the beginning of this whole thing, because as India's defense sector opens up for private sector manufacturing, and this is one sector we are treating private sector and public sector now totally on equal footing as we go in for manufacturing in India of the defense sector, as we open up India's economy in a very big way across medical devices, across construction, across railways, you will see a huge upsurge, because if there's one thing in American companies, it's their spirit of enterprise, it's their spirit of innovation, it's about their being world-class. America is a world-class, is a top economy because it believes in merit. It simply believes in merit, it believes in innovation, it believes in the spirit of dynamism, and I think that is something which, as India opens up, as it integrates itself with the global economy, as it becomes more and more easy and simple place to do business, India cannot grow at rates of 9 to 10% per annum over a 3-decade period. It is not possible for India to achieve those levels of growth of 9 to 10% for 3 decades or more without a very close relationship with American companies. American companies represent the best of the world, And therefore, if India's aspiration, its ambition, and I think to my mind, India must have that huge ambition. India must be hungry for growth. If India is hungry for growth and wants to strive for 9 to 10% growth rates over a 3-decade period, it would just not be feasible without a very, very close relationship between Indian companies and American companies. And that is what will happen in due course as India becomes easy, simple, a more integrated player in the global economy as it continues to drive itself to a higher trajectory growth rate. With these few words, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Couple of questions. In my experience at such conferences, you have two types of speeches: uplifting but somber, uplifting but abstract, or factual but somber. Mr. Kant has given us a rare speech that is both uplifting and factual. Thank you very much. We have time for maybe a couple of questions, if someone is interested. Yes, there's a question there. If you could identify yourself, sir, and ask a quick question.
I'm involved in standards and quality. With the TPP and TPIP type of multilateral agreements coming into existence, how the growth of the India will be affected through these multilateral agreements.
Fine. And we have more time for one more question before I turn to Mr. Kant. Yes, there's a question there.
Myself, Dr. Shiva, I'm from MIT Manesar. I have. It's a good that we are basically opening up our various sectors, maybe defense or aerospace or railways. But the question is, what we are doing to protect or to enhance the capabilities of our in-house technologies. For example, I read recently that some of our helicopters, which we were selling to Ecuador, so some of the helicopters crashed on some inaugural session. So in that respect, what we are going to do?
Fine, Mr. Kant, two questions, one on TPP and multilateral trade, and one on quality standards in India.
So firstly, my belief is that you can't isolate yourself from global trends across the world. And these multilateral pacts actually are cutting across boundaries. They're cutting across not merely just trade, investments, intellectual property. A vast range of your domestic regime gets impacted by the kind of multilateral trade discussions that are taking place across the world. And India cannot isolate. If your ambition is to grow at those rates, it's not possible to remain outside them and say that no, we want to achieve growth, we want to create jobs, and say that we'll remain isolated from the rest of the world. It's not feasible at all. It's just not feasible. And therefore, India must become a very active, a very, very critical player. India must take the front foot forward in many of these discussions. We are playing a very major role in RCEP. We should take that forward, conclude that, and move forward to many more discussions. Cut across these. You have to be an integral part of the global supply chain, and therefore, India needs to be a very, very major player in all these global discussions which are taking place. You're a large economy, and therefore, I think India must play a critical and significant role. On the second issue about some plane crashing or something, I want to make this point that when FDI comes in, no country grows alone on the strength of its domestic manufacturing. When FDI comes in, it brings in not merely, you don't bring it in for just the resources. It brings in global technology, it brings in research and development, it brings in some of the best skills available across the world. I mean, these are some of the finest companies which have done their due diligence to come in. So when they come in, they are coming in to partner your companies. They upgrade your skills, they upgrade your technology. You become a top-class player. And with them, you establish thousands of ancillaries. I mean, look at the spin-off of, say, GE manufacturing, or Alstom manufacturing, which will come into Madhepura and Marhora in Bihar. I mean, what is Bihar today? So what is the spin-off there? Bihar takes off as an industrial state, manufacturing takes off, jobs take off, you have thousands of ancillaries which are created, and then you spin off the whole modernization of railways. You have completely, you enhance the speed of your transformation of Indian railways, which has been stuck in a time warp. And you bring in completely new technology to change your railways, your speed of travel increases. Oh, it's a complete transformation of India which will take place across. So not merely railways, you need to do this with defense, you need to do this in aerospace, you need to do this in pharmaceutical. Just open yourself to the rest of the world to allow good technology, good inflow coming in, good skills coming in. The best of the world will come in. You use the strength of your domestic, your large size of your domestic market, use it as a springboard for creating global excellence in India. Not so that they can capture your domestic market, but they'll capture the rest of the world from India.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kant, for this illuminating talk. With that, we come to the conclusion of what has been a very rich and engaging discussion over the past 1.5 days. I'd like to, on behalf of the Observer Research Foundation, I'd like to thank Mr. Kant, all our other speakers and panelists, our supporters at Gilead, in particular 2 individuals, Greg Ashton, the Vice President of Gilead, who's with us, and Ashley Tellis, who's at the back of the room from Carnegie, who've been instrumental in putting together this conference. I'd now like to invite all of you to lunch.